Welcome, everyone. Hope you all had a nice Thanksgiving. We've got a pretty quick agenda tonight, so let's get started. First, we've got the approval of minutes. Was everybody able to look through them? Any corrections? None? Anyone willing to make a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Lloyd. Second? Thank you, Jennifer. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? None. Any public comment? None.
Hi there. My name is.
Is this on the minutes? Okay, give me 1 second. Once we approve the minutes, then I'll call for public comment.
Okay.
Thank you.
You can stay up there.
That's okay.
This
It
is
just
public
takes a second.
comment on the minute.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
it's just about the minutes.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Oh, you don't have to.
Okay, seeing none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Up next, public comment. At this time, the board will allow comment on public matters that are not on the main agenda. Members of the audience are encouraged to briefly address the trustees on issues that are not on the agenda. The chair of the board will seek comments from the audience on significant items as they occur. Public matters do not include any pending legal matters, private personnel issues, or private student issues. Please do not attempt to address such issues at this time, or you'll be ruled out of order. Please note that individuals will be given 3 minutes for public comment. Any public comment at this time? Okay.
My name is Judd Nyberg. I'm the union president of the union, as well as, I just wanted to talk about staff retention. There's a lot of focus on how we can hire, how we can draw new talent, and one of the things that I think is really, that I think we're overlooking is, when you're in a building, go and seek out staff that you might not normally talk to. People that work in the line, not normally seen. One of the things that really builds my confidence up is when I have those interactions. It makes me feel good when I feel like I'm connecting with someone, and I think that personal connection is really lost. I think that when you do that, people feel like they want to do better. So as much focus as there is on how we can hire new people, we really need to look at how we can keep people time. And I think that's the easiest way to do it is by personal shake their hand. How's it going today? And I think that'll really help.
Thank you. Do we have anybody else for public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on. Up next, Randy.
Yeah, I gave you a copy of this at the last board meeting, and just wanted further clarification if you want to pursue this or not. Basically, it's the settlement agreement with McKinsey for $23 million into Public School District Opioid Recovery Funds. We'll also hold and distribute the funds and other settlements and resolutions that school districts have reached with other opioid industry defendants. The school district trust will then make grants based on school districts' need and the grants that they submit. All class action, all school districts in the nation except otherwise specified are eligible to apply and receive grants from the trust. However, under the settlement, no school district is guaranteed any settlement funds, and the trust will not distribute the funds on a pro rate or a proportional basis. So basically what it's saying is that you have an opportunity to apply for a grant from this fund, and, then they'll determine through their third-party administrator what grants will be funded and which ones won't. I don't know how much it'll be. I did see that the schools, the 13 schools that were actually involved in the lawsuit, those districts are guaranteed, $10,000. So I don't assume it to be a lot, but it could be something that could help with our, counseling and mental health services in the future. And of course, whatever grant you get, whatever amount you get, then you have to match it. So it'll be twice as effective. But again, it's entirely up to the board whether they're interested in pursuing it or not. If you looked at page 5, that gives what the grant requirements are, and they are based on a number of factors, not just whether your school is affected by opioids or not. So that's pretty much it. It's just up to the board whether they want us to continue to look into this or just move on.
Andy, was I reading in there that we need to retain our own attorneys for this?
No. But the grant already has the attorneys retained, and they're paid for out of the settlement funds.
Becca?
So clarification, this is not joining onto the lawsuit. This is getting funds from a third-party granting agency who got their funds from this lawsuit.
That is correct.
So it's, the decision right now is provided in the notice of whether or not we opt out of the settlement and retain our own private ability to sue this McKinsey entity separately as KPS, right? Which I'm not sure we want to do that and incur the cost. So really, it's a matter of if we opt out, then we retain that right? Or by not opting out, we're automatically a part of it, then we have the ability to apply for these. But the court still needs to approve this settlement, which is a modest amount, frankly, for what you're seeing. The res judicata argument is basically this issue's already been litigated under the private actions that were brought on behalf of all the states. So neither here nor there. The real question is, are we opting out or not? And based on my read of it, I wouldn't recommend opting. But nationwide.
Well, but that's after the really large lawsuit that went through California. Don't forget that this is the little one after the big one's already paid out.
Was there a separate
Yes.
big one involving schools in California?
This is the little secondary one.
And this is whether or not we opt into or opt out.
Right.
Because we are not a part of the big one.
So so again, whether we opt in, basically if we want to apply for any of the funds, opt-in doesn't get us any funds. It just, we have to write a grant that would then allow us to be considered for funds.
And honestly, right now, what we have to do is decide whether or not we want to opt out.
Rebecca, did you have a question?
I actually had a question for Jen, because I would tend to opt out. The grants, I don't think our district is particularly likely to get. I think they're fairly small and would, have the time of writing a grant. So I wasn't sure why we would want to join.
Well, if we join, not whether we join or not,
Right.
it's whether we opt out.
Right.
So, the cost of creating something like this
No, I'm saying just forget the whole thing, don't be involved in it.
altogether, I mean, when you read as to what the harm is that's occurred, that would apply, including like students exposed pre-birth that have affect their, learning abilities, students traumatized by family member struggles or death, and then students themselves suffer. Right? I mean, I think the school district, as any school district in this country, maybe could write grants on those. But to your point, there's not a lot of money there. Our likelihood of success is meaningful, is small, but I don't think it's worth opting out, because if we opt out, then we basically are saying, well, we have no opportunity to get this money. there's no way we're gonna be able to. And we'll have the opportunity, whether we apply for anything or not.
Sue, did you have a comment on this one? No? Okay. Ursula?
I know that there was like an amount per school. I was just wondering, I know we haven't agreed to this, but if there was any suggestion or anything, like if a couple different school districts all in the valley could apply for these grants, if we could pool the money to maybe do something a little bit more meaningful. Like it might be hard to do it with the little pieces. If all the schools did it, maybe we could get a counselor that could like go to all the schools for a year or something.
My question is, this would involve some time, some staff time to apply for a grant. From this, does it have to be done this year? I couldn't find when there was a deadline for it. And I don't know if if the timing right now, if we want to put more on our staff plate to do this for a small amount. I mean, I understand what you're saying, that, you know, if we opt out, we're, you know, have no opportunity to opt back in. But I don't know if it's worth the staff time.
Typically, these trusts exist until the funds are gone. So that's really how the trustees have fiduciary obligations. They can't just give out all the money in year one for things not related to this. But if they get all the grants in year one related to these issues, it would be gone in year one. Last as long as oftentimes they're only paid out as a person. Which necessarily means funds are retained in the.
So if we leave it as is right now, we do not opt out, and,
Then we're in.
yeah, and, I mean, we don't lose anything, we don't gain anything. If we find time and ask, you guys have time to write a grant at some point, then we can do it at that point? Is that what, everybody in agreement? Krista?
On the bottom of page 5, it says, it is expected that the grant-making process will start in early 2024, and the trust will begin awarding grants in late 2024, if that helps anything. Also, it says that there's other places that are still getting pursued, and that it could be 56.5 million that could be in the trust, so it could be more than just less. I don't know if everybody read all the words in there, but.
It's a little bit. Okay,
I move that we don't opt out.
Elementary only, right?
yes,
Okay.
so there'll be two motions, but I just want to see if we're all on the same page. Leave it as is, we're not opting out. Rebecca?
I do take this fairly serious. I mean, to me, to become part of a litigating situation means Randy spoke last month that he had strong feelings about this being wrong or what happened being wrong. And I guess for me to want to be a part of this, I would really need to see what the effect to this district has been. And there has been an effect, and it's been a major effect. And then I would be for it, but without that background information, I don't feel comfortable being involved. You know, I'd like to see the stats. Do we have parents who are pregnant, who are on opium when they were pregnant, or on opioids, sorry, when they were pregnant? And have we seen those kids come into the school district and have large needs? I mean, that's, to me, the heart of this. This is for that issue, and I don't know if I haven't seen the stats that show that we're facing that issue as of yet. Do we have such?
Well, so, I mean, the litigation decided that there was nationally that problem.
But is it here? Is it here?
Yeah.
If it is?
Yes.
It is absolutely here.
In a big way.
And I agree with Jen that from what I have heard, more than other places.
Sorry, I need to pass that out.
No,
And I wrote
It's a
math for
valid
these stats
question. It's a valid question.
after last meeting, that I need to see the numbers.
I can invite you to some ride-alongs on an ambulance, and you can see it very quickly.
Stats, not anecdotes.
Well, and before we even write a grant, I'm sure we can pull stats because we're going to have to include that in a grant. So this is, thank you for the clarification, Jen, that we're already in this litigation process. What we're voting on right now is to get out of it, and we don't want anything to do with it here, now, or in the future. Well, Jack?
Well, I was late. Is there a motion to not participate?
There's a pending motion to not,
It hasn't been seconded.
not opt out. It has
Like
not
to
been-
stay.
So it's not.
Well, my question is, does it require a motion? And if we do nothing, then we're automatically in. And if we don't want to participate, then that would require a motion. So I just do the opposite.
Well, and we have a recommended action on here that I'm going off of, is move to approve applying for elementary school grants from the Public School District Opioid Recovery Trust. Do we need to change that? Are we still sticking with that?
No, your motion to opt out would tell us
Not
that we want to
opt out.
pursue it,
So we just,
Well, I think it's super.
not opt out.
Yeah, so to not opt out means we have the option to do this, but whether or not we undertake the endeavor and effort on the staff side to write a grant for this, I think that's the ideas they have for a grant.
at a later date.
Yep.
Lloyd?
Just because we approve applying for the grants, doesn't mean that we have to apply for the grants. So, I don't know, I don't wanna jump past elementary, but I'm ready to move forward.
Yeah.
Got the question.
I will second Jen's motion.
Ursula?
I was just gonna, and I felt like.
Hold on, wait, 1 second. So it's been moved and seconded. Okay.
Discussion.
On the elementary
Yeah,
level.
and I felt like Jim made it pretty clear, but I just wanted to clarify again. It seems like the bigger reason to opt out would be if we wanted to pursue our own legal action.
Yes.
Like, it's not, you know, the grant is another thing that we could do. This is really asking, is this enough, or do we want to pursue our own action? And I think that what it comes down to is we don't have the resources to pursue our own action, not that we wouldn't have a valid case. I think we would have a valid case. The money's not there. I think this is our best chance at possibly, maybe, having some kind of resources for the school district.
Any further discussion, elementary only? Any public comment on this? Seeing none, elementary only, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Opposed?
Unopposed? Okay, moving on. High school. Same issue. Anyone willing to make a motion?
I say we don't need to make a motion. Just do nothing because we're automatically in there. Why spend time talking about it?
I second that.
We're moving to approve the grant, to apply for the grant, not moving to stay in or out.
Option to apply for a grant.
Okay? That's what it says on the minute.
Okay, so
On the agenda.
Lloyd made a motion.
Yes.
Do I have a second?
Second?
Thank you, Jack. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none. Any public comment? Seeing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Opposed? One opposed. Thank you. Okay. Personnel action items. Liz?
Any questions on this portion of the part? I do want to talk about the second half. I have some interesting data for you on the next.
Since you're talking about, you have stuff on the open positions portion?
Yes.
Okay. Bottom of this page.
So we've been keeping this data since September was the first time we had this up here. In September, we had 26.3% students, so we're down to 19. And then in maintenance two, we were at 66%. Bus drivers, we were at 30%. Bus monitors, we were at 80%. And we have since added food service techs, but we're only at Good downward trending data on the unfilled. Yeah. Do you have any other questions?
Anybody willing to make a motion to approve the all action items?
So moved.
Thank you, Lloyd.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Ursula. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion?
It's just, I mean, now that we've got folks in the door and open positions has consistently been the, it's really important to effort to talk to engage with these folks and just go off our school.
Judd and I, and Rick Hagley are also working on, it would probably last the probation, but give them a plan of contact, and then Chris Hirsch and I are also working on one.
Rebecca?
So last year when we heard from our teacher mentoring program, we had discussed, I think it was in governance, was it, Lance, where we talked about making sure that we were extending this not just to teachers, but to all our staff. Is this a part of that already set up group? Is this a new initiative separate? Did anything ever come of our saying that we should definitely have this happen through all our staff? Or what's the status of where we are with our staff mentoring?
Probably the same project that was being discussed along. This was one of the first things that was when I started here.
Any further discussion? And any public comment? None? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Oh, you're still here. Up next. Just kidding. Custodial MOA.
Great, so this is something that Judd and I have worked back and forth quite a bit. I've really appreciated Judd through this process. This is also based off of the custodial shortage task force that was formed with two board members, and so then how are you driving?
That's not downloading.
Basically, what's happening are three things in this MOA. The foundation of this is that, for over a year, we've had a custodial shortage of around. So I've been approached by a couple principals, staff that would be willing to work outside of their contractual time, to help fill some bits and chunks. The CBA currently does not allow for part-time positions to take positions unless there's an emergency. So administratively, we could just come in and make it happen. Instead, we've chosen to work with agreement, which has been vetted through the AFPME, which is the custodial larger union. The custodial union also voted on this and approved it, has ran through it. So the major points of what this is going to do outside of the contract, changing minimum qualifications. It used to say high school. We've added the or to align with food service. So or an equivalent. That the hiring committee deals with. Secondly, we can split full-time positions into part-time. Hiring committee, the staff members interviewing, and the union, based on the FTE. So at the job fair, we had quite a few retirees that would love to work, like, but the CBA prevents. So this does open the door for that. Third is what will take care of our current staff, so any non-custodial union staff is what we put in there instead of list, the lengthy list. And a good example is our paras, most of them are 0.81 FTE. Job out of and help our custodial team out. So you can see there what breakdown of that. An important point to note is, if there, so I can just see from experience, it would be unproductive if all of the custodial supplies were not put away and to how the custodial, other things that we went back. So at any point, if the custodial realm is not being taken care of through this process, or supplies are spread here and there, we at least try it out. Lastly, I'll just point out that this agreement will be revisited. We're negotiating with the, that is in this as well, the talking point, but it would just.
Has there been an effort to do some standardization at the schools where they have a checklist of what needs to be done? So if you have people pop in on a 0.19 FTE, to your point, they're not putting stuff in the wrong spot or doing things contrary to.
Yeah, so far, where this idea really got going is lots of staff who don't work in the summer due to take over summer. They work more, and then this carried over to a teacher maybe specifically cleaning their class or all of the kindergarten team. So it is in here that, the principals and the custodial director will work in conjunction.
I was kind of more on the checklist point.
They'll have specific certain tasks that then will be communicated with the current custodial.
Thank you, Liz. I'm looking for a motion. Anybody willing to make a motion to approve the custodial MOA as presented? Thank you, Jen. Is there a second?
Second.
Lloyd, thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? None. Any public comment? None. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Okay, up next we have the elementary consent agenda. No, Rebecca, you had a question about an item on here.
I did, the SWET, KMS,
Fundraiser?
fundraiser. We, as you can see on second or third page, it says, have you done Toyota fundraising? Usually we don't allow groups to do specific individual fundraisers until they've done some Toyota fundraising. Toyota fundraiser being our large fundraiser that asks businesses for money so that we're not bugging businesses all the time. This one didn't say it had done any Toyota fundraising first, so I thought that raised sort of, is this still a policy we want to have? Are we still doing this? And I also just had some little stuff on here of how carefully is this being done. You know, on the third page it said, we don't want to be asking businesses for more than $100 without, and it doesn't say how much we're asking businesses for. It doesn't actually say if the student is asking for money or the teachers are. It sort of implies it on the sheet of the checklist of 4s of what they're graded at. But it looked more like they just put 4 on everything rather than really thought through this new fundraiser. Like on something it said like, we know it'll do it because it's proven. And it's like, well, this is the first time we're doing this fundraiser. It's not proven. So I tended to think that at least to understand, do we want to have our student extracurricular groups be doing Toyota fundraising before they're doing their private fundraising? And if so, then I think we should not okay this on those grounds.
I put this on the agenda and spoke to Mr. Cowser about, most of those concerns. I can probably take most of those off.
Cool.
One by one, if you wanna go through them. We'll start with the fundraising request, not including the Toyota tickets. Talked to Mr. Cowser about that. He said due to the nature of who shows up for these activities, he didn't want that to be a deterrent for kids to participate. So what they're trying to do is encourage a group of middle school kids that aren't involved in an extracurricular activity to show up, and it's, students who, I think students who work out together, or sweat together.
Yeah.
Exercise together, that's what it is. So they're really targeting a group of kids that typically aren't engaged in some sort of physical activity after school and get them involved in some, and then challenging them to come back and continue to come back. And so he really is adamant that he does not want them, their participation to be marked also by a requirement to fundraise to be a part of it. So he is personally, soliciting businesses for donations. He's encouraging students. He, did share a copy of the letter with me. I'm fine with a copy of the letter. And I, am fully supportive of the mission. The, program has been supported through the stipend committee. And so there's a stipend for the teachers. It's a pretty minimal stipend that it doesn't make them whole for their time, but, just recognizes that like to do with lots of our activities that we appreciate the service of the teachers.
Just, how, is the number over $100 that we're asking for, that they're asking for businesses?
It's kind of an open, whatever you would like to donate.
Okay.
And then they do sell space on the back of the t-shirt, so if kids show up to a certain amount of, these after-school, exercise time, then they do qualify for a t-shirt. It's kind of a, way for the hallways to show that they're part of that group.
But it's not like $500 gets you on the t-shirt and,
I actually think there is a number
okay.
like that. I don't recall what the exact number is, but if you want to buy advertisement on the back of the t-shirt, it is or you can just make a donation anytime to the program. And I think there's a lot of support in our community from people that want to see more middle school kids involved in something healthy and productive after school, especially some of our students that aren't plugged into regular traditional sports activities. So I think it's pretty easy for him to fundraise. It's pretty easy to get behind. I'm behind it.
Thank you for your answers. It removed all my I just was really curious about all that stuff, so thank you.
Yep.
Good.
Got
I'll in fact
clarification?
move to okay the consent agenda as presented.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a second?
Second it.
Thank you, Ursula. It's been moved and seconded. Elementary only. Oh, I guess, any more discussion? Nope. Any public comment? Nope. Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Consent agenda district-wide. I'm willing to make a motion. Thank you, Lloyd. Do I have a second?
Second?
Thank you, Jack. Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Any public comment? None. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Okay, we got through all of that. Up next, our work study topic. Welcome. You guys need a few minutes. We're gonna upload something. Okay.
So while they, transition, I guess I'll introduce them. If you don't recall, this is, A&E. We hired them to do our long-range facility planning. We've had lots of meetings. I had to chuckle when Heather said we have a short agenda tonight, because, I've known Shane for a long time, and he's never had anything go short.
I've already talked to Shane.
We have Shane Jacobs, Brad Dahl, and Mary Demro. Mary's really the brains of the operation, that's fair to say, right? But they've just been a pleasure to work with. We really challenged them, they've challenged us. I'm sure they'll talk a lot about that. But, if you remember, the main thing we asked them to do is do an overall facility, inventory and help us prioritize looking into the future. If we have limited funds, what are our highest priorities? And then, a different way for us to own the information, and that was Micah's idea, which I thought was a really great way to capture their work so that we could use it
you know, beyond this board, beyond this administration, or be in a usable document. Typically, those things are handed over in the architect format, and so it's, you know, cumbersome and it gets outdated. We're getting this in a format where we can own it and we can drive it and we can update it and keep it on track. So that's gonna be very helpful, just to manage resources going forward. And then the bigger picture of looking at, projections and then creative options and then talking about personalized competency-based education and trying to foresee the future of what education looks like, what our spaces are gonna look like. And so that if we're being thoughtful in design, we're not creating spaces that get demoed or spaces that don't get used properly. So it's been a really good partnership. It's been, fun to go through a lot of work. And then this meeting got set up because A&E felt like they were at a spot where, they needed feedback from the board on how to use the remainder of their contract time with us instead of going down the traditional path of where this usually leads to bond promotion or something like that. And so we suggested that they use this opportunity to give the board an update to then direct the remainder of their, contracted time.
Talking that, because they're not up yet.
That's all I have, so Shane's gonna have to stall from here.
We're not gonna let Shane have a mic. Usually I'm the buzz. Thank you all for, I'm gonna try to fill the space while she tries to do this, but, I wanna take Matt on the road with us as we work with a lot of districts, and Peter for that matter, just because they've been just such a great conduit, and, I think you guys are leading the state in what you want to look at from an educational. We have the opportunity to work in districts across the state. We've worked in 20 districts for the last 10 years, and I think your team and your staff and your principals are, I'm being as genuine as I can possibly be right now, like as far as working with them and the way they want to push your education environment, what they want to do with students, and the way they want to elevate the educational, your system is unbelievable. And then I think when Matt said he's challenged us, that's where he's challenged us, to say, how do we take this further? How do we go? So for that, that's been inspirational, aspirational for us as we go further and further into this. So kind of hit on some things. We've almost completed, the deferred maintenance information at all of your facilities, which I think Matt was talking about. This outlines everything from lights, ceilings, floors, anything that we can observe physically. We didn't do any destructive, things, but looking at mechanical systems, electrical systems, and you have a database now for that your maintenance staff can take and use in every facility, and it's really a working tool that we do with a lot of districts, in fact. And you can look at that and you can start to prioritize what are some really key pieces that you want to do. That was one leg of what we did that is, ready to be delivered here in the next probably few months, or less probably. The second piece and the third piece of this, we kind of three legs, is we look at your facilities from a capacity standpoint, and maybe we'll just zoom ahead to some of this stuff. All that. We want to talk to you just a little bit about what we've explored and where we want to continue to go, and that's just based on that. Again, this is not a reflection of A&E. What we've done, we really want this to be a reflection of your district and who you are. And so all of these people have been instrumental, all of your teachers and staff at all of your schools, as well as superintendents and Randy, and bringing in some trustees as part of this has been just a phenomenal process. And we've not done yet. We've got a lot to do. There's some big things that they're considering that really need your attention. So we've been doing this. We aligned it all with your strategic plan. This was really became sort of the baseline of how we use this as sort of a guidance principles for how we look at things, and it isn't meeting the strategic plan as we've gone through this. Don't let that just fall to the side. You guys do a lot of work to develop your strategic plans. We want to make sure that it is in alignment with that. So we started the meetings where we had all of the groups, the high school group and the elementary group together. We broke them apart because we felt like they needed the attention for each individual kind of part of the district. And so we focused on them. We bring them back together because they were really interested and they learned from each other about things that they were doing, but they really had very different conversations, which I think was appropriate for what they're trying to achieve at each level. Again, these were just some of the meetings. We did a number of meetings with the committee. We actually did one community meeting with a lot of committee members as we were talking about some of the work-based learning and different things at the high school level, and that was a phenomenal meeting that we'll talk about here in a little bit. Trying to be quick. So
So these were the three legs that I was kind of trying to get to here. So the facility assessment was the thing I was talking about at the beginning. The visioning is really, a lot of what we're talking about when we're talking about the educational environment and what are we trying to create related to, what are the goals that you want to do, what do you want to achieve as a district from that side. And then the other part is really about the demographic analysis. A lot of it's about pure capacity. How many students do you have in your facility? How much in your facility support, and what do we think may be coming? And that's always a interesting. So of everything we looked at, did everything from, we even had some phone calls with D.A. Davidson just to understand your bonding capacity. We've talked about what would construction timelines be, and we are not naive to, knowing that bonds and levies are just a really difficult thing to pass, not only in this district, across the state. We actually saw in 2022 that Montana was the worst state in the United States. Or less, every other state was above 71%. So there's something going on in our state that we just can't get.
It's some between 40 and 70.
Yeah.
Not everyone was 70 gets into that.
But anyway, there's a lot of things things that were really interesting. We're getting student surveys and teacher surveys on some really interesting topics, and we want to share some of that information with you. Some of that was related to what careers they were interested in, and as well as surveys for teachers related to what would be ideal schedules for them look like, and how can that impact capacity relative to your school. So we were looking at things relative to capacity. How do we solve capacity without always just building something? Can we do these in a more creative manner in order to solve some of that? A lot of this stuff is all in there. We scared some people with construction costs and what we're seeing across the state. We showed some numbers, and I think everyone about had a heart attack. Peter just walked out of the room, and done. We'll talk to you today a little bit about just the capacities, what we heard of immediate needs of some of your facilities. What are some of the things that we saw with, potential renovations or additions to schools, the surveys that we talked about, and some of the. Just to backtrack for 1 second here, and then I always talk too much. I'm gonna let Mary talk here a little bit. She'll kick me on the side. Go to the next slide. So we looked at your elementary and middle schools, and there's another slide after this that's the high school, but we talk about this word we say functional capacity, and it's a really important term that we use in kind of the K-12 planning world. Functional capacity is the amount of students we believe we can fit in your facility and really run it in an efficient way. Any principal that sits in this room is going to tell you that you can't operate a facility at 550 students perfectly in an elementary school because you have different ebbs and flows of students that come through, you have different programs that you're trying to do and different things. We look at it in an elementary district, there's an algorithm, an equation we use. In a middle school and high schools, we look at it for how many periods of the day are the classes being used. In our functional capacities, we always use, if it's a 7-period day or an 8-period day, we do 7 out of 8 periods or 6 out of 7 because that is kind of the ideal. You can always use those classrooms, that additional period, but that starts to set your capacity at more of 100%. It gets unfunctional at that point, for lack of a better term. But just to summarize that, your capacity within your elementary schools is about 2,100 students that you can fit. In your middle school, you can fit about 1,528. As of, when it says today, that means probably last year's enrollment, but your enrollment in your elementary was 1,853, and in your middle school was 1,040. So this is where it gets a little tricky in the 30%, 60% column. That demographic report is completed by a demographer. First thing they'll say is, the minute the demographic report is completed, it's wrong. But there were two methods what they used. The first method is they took your previous 10 years of growth or change in enrollment and projected it out the next 10 years. And the second piece of that was looking at residential development within your elementary district, and for the high school, then it was within your high school district. Two very distinct lines there, and we needed to capture all of that. And that second piece looked at the residential growth in those districts and projected out with that residential growth what could be applied to potential as far as what students are feeding into the elementary, what students from that growth will be feeding into the middle school as well. With that information, we kind of set 2 fence posts of here's probably a more conservative mode, which is your historical data. Here is a very aggressive mode. I think we had a lot of conversations very quickly. We all realized that the aggressive mode would all perfectly have to happen, and it's probably never going to be realized in the next 10 years.
so what you're seeing up here is, between those two fence posts, if we go the 30% marker or the 60% marker, between those two fence posts, a demographic report projects that you will have about 2,400 students, in your elementary district. You will have, in 30%, and at, 30%, you'd have about 1,200 students in your middle schools, in your middle school. So you can see relative to your functional capacity in your elementary, it's kind of worrisome of where you're putting these students, if that is really realized. 60%, it just gets worse, as you can see up there. And so it's something that we were looking at very hard in the elementary schools, of how do we find ways to creatively create more elementary schools, knowing that, just adding space isn't always the best option. You're pretty landlocked in a lot of your elementaries, so you have really tight sites with really. Same thing here related to your high schools. We did a first top one for all of them, and then we just isolated Flathead and Glacier. So when we say all, that's including Linderman, and it's also including Egg Center, obviously up there. You've got capacity across your whole district for over 4,200 students, enrollment just over 3,000. You can see between Flathead where you're at. It doesn't really paint a picture that you're in a dire need of space, but as we got into the spaces, what we saw where you're lacking science spaces for science, you're lacking some general ed labs, or some general classroom spaces. What really deters that number is your elective spaces. When you have a lot of spaces for like shop or music or performing arts, the way schools are programmed is often saying you can put 40 or 50 students in those classes for 7 periods of the day out of the 8 periods, so that really inflates the number when maybe they're not always used. For your general ed classrooms might be used 100% of the day. The science labs are probably used 100% of the day. And hard time cycling through there. So there's a need that we're seeing in that regard relative to not necessarily space as much as it's specific space that you're looking at. Any questions about that? I tried to summarize up a lot of, but.
My first question is, these always will, somebody, developing what you're doing, you always use a single percentage number for a 10-year period of time instead of an annual increase per year. So like the 30% represents a 2.6% increase per year, and the 60%, 4.8. But if you look at the last 30 years, we've averaged 1.25% per year. So, but you're looking at a 10-year period, but when you look at a 30, then you're looking at the different cycles that exist. So when you're looking at this 10-year period of time, if the cycle's like this, then you've all of a sudden missed the one that went down and came up. So you gotta look at it that way, so I just want you to comment on that a little bit.
Well, that's why and that's probably why we need to take historical data and just say, running out 30 years, kind of mirroring that same thing 30 years. Because you're right, there's dips, right? And we're seeing it actually across a lot of districts where there is a little dip right now across many right now. Whereas we do long-range facility planning, we'd rather be planning for overgrowth than under, right? If we are not prepared for something that could hit your school district and you don't have space to, you start putting modulars on facilities, you start creating learning environments, learning spaces that looks like you're not being proactive, and it becomes, I think in some cases, a safety issue, it becomes a learning issue, it becomes a lot of things, and so in this case, we're just trying to be proactive rather than,
My other comment is when you're talking about the growth in the elementary district and or the high school district's easy, you know where all the rural districts are. The elementary, did your calculations take into account that a lot of the Kalispell growth is in a rural district and not in the Kalispell, elementary school district?
the elementary, the bounds of the growth were all within the confines of.
Even though most of the growth that you see is in, West Valley School District?
Not accounted for your elementary.
Okay.
It's accounted in your high school.
Okay, thank you.
We met with both in county,
Delineate all that out.
and basically put a pin in that for each one that was associated with single family boundary, and the elementary district boundary don't perfectly overlap. You get some that are county projects.
Do you remember per unit, what they came up with as far as a child, like a quarter of a child or half a child? Half a child?
And in fact, we got an interesting conversation. Word number for multifamily and the household, just a family, 2 or 3 want to live in an apartment. It's just not a real conversation about, like, becoming a real harsh reality right now.
Thank you.
We saw this, I mean, this is why our high schools are looking at much bigger growth than our elementary schools, because where we're seeing a lot of this growth. I mean, I remember the shocking slide you showed us of that we essentially need a new high school within 10 years because the outlying districts are growing in huge rates, whereas we're staying relatively steadily on our growth pattern, maybe going a little up, maybe going a little down. But, so where we're gonna see that is in the high school district because of West Valley and
Would you mind going to the one with the elementary schools? And I don't know if this is a question for you all or maybe for our, superintendents, but I'm always confused. If there are 1,800 elementary students, won't they all end up in the middle school? Okay, thank you.
And you also see, just as they get older, there's just different opportunities. Elementary schools just tend to be more neighborhood, and then as they grow, middle schools just offer different opportunities, and then high schools offer a lot more opportunities.
Yeah, the grades thing, that math works for me. I'm so confused. I'm like,
With the way housing's going in the valley, did you guys look at non-conventional housing as well? Like, it seems like every week somebody's posting another shed on their property that they just turned into an apartment, literally, sheds. And, you know, it's easy, I mean, while you couldn't house a family of 4 in there, you could definitely be a single parent with a kid in there or something like that. But I'm constantly seeing, people renting out a room in their house or, sheds or whatever else. Did you guys have any kind of a answer for that, or did you guys look at that at all?
Conversation about any of those AD.
Wasn't, okay. Just
That's
curious.
much harder for the city or county to act versus.
Super hard.
I think, just probably one more thing to note is that, you know, it was interesting, West Valley, of course, is one of some of the development that was planned with shockingly down area, but then there was they're being built right next to, Pearson, Elrod, and Russell. Schools that were built. Don't really need to expand, some of them appear to, but, they're right next to it. There is an interesting, theme that is occurring. And what it looks like. And we're starting to see some of those, multifamily, which is curious when you see it enrollment. Years old, they're not in the district. Out of district, what is it?
So we're also still living in this what we know category, which essentially means we started this process trying to identify everything that we want to respond to through these explorations. So in everything that is looking at capacity is how do we see in the future, there's also, we recognize immediate needs facing each elementary school, each high school. And this is not necessarily inclusive of the facilities assessment and the facilities report. So these descriptions and these items that kind of rose to the top of terms of a worthwhile investment for the district are not things like a roof replacement or a foundation or painting or things like that. They're more design related, so it could be safety and security or, not having, like, for example, some of the things related to the high school would be the weight rooms or the gym, green space, parking, and these are things that outside of, as we're planning long range into the future, that need to be part of the conversation, in terms of what the investments are to be. I'm not gonna go through each one of those for sake of time. The other thing that we've spent a lot of time realizing that there are people in the room that have a lot of voice and value in the conversation, but there's also people outside of the room that we wanted to make sure how to incorporate, their opinions and their ideas, and that included, teachers and staff, especially, and also even students. So we, through the course of this process, put out 3 different surveys. One was related to, teaching spaces and attributes. So instead of saying how many classrooms do you need, we really broke that down of how much space do you need, how are students grouped, and then what are they doing? And it's really just a way to categorize and be specific about how can we best serve as a learning environment and rethink what we have.
And one caveat to that, what that survey showed really quickly is, I think in your elementary district, it was like 60 to 66% of your staff want to work in groups of students of 15 or smaller.
Yeah.
We're designing classrooms around 30 students. That's a very different way of thinking about space. And so, like, if you were to think from a learning environment, and this is a trend that we're seeing across the nation with learning environments in some districts that are more progressive, thinking about what are the activities and what are the groupings of students versus 30 students, put them in a box and just keep marching the thing down the line. We shift that.
The second one would be, this was more geared towards the high school group, so we asked about their career interests. One of the conversation topics that came up is how are we preparing students, beyond their academic career? And so this was a way for us to kind of gauge what are students exposed to, what are they interested, what fields would they like to pursue after high school, and see where that alignment would be with the district and what they feel like they could provide. And then the last one is actually more geared towards staff of all levels, but thinking about alternative schedules. And we'll go a little bit into each one of these more, but this is asking about the opportunities of what if we had a year-round school schedule, what if we had a 4-day school week, engaging interest on how that might impact some of the approaches and explorations that we propose. So, given all of that, where we're thinking about capacity and what the needs are and what those voices are in the room, how do we attempt to explore that? This is just a roadmap of where we have been and what we've done. So this started back in February, I want to say. So we're about to condense 10 months worth of work in about 15, 20 minutes. So just stop and interrupt us when you have questions. But I think we did, as a collective team with the committee, a pretty good job of responding each time and each meeting to say, what is the next thing? What is the best way to resolve the problem? And it's a big reason that we're sitting in this room now and wanting this place, because we've gotten to a place where there's so much been explored. We want to start to create some hierarchy of what issues are kind of rising to the top. I'm not going to go through all of this, but we can reference it if we need to. When looking at that, we really tried to expand the way that we were looking at this beyond a building. And I know that the 3 of us were pushed out of our comfort zone in a lot of ways, just not thinking about rooms and boxes and spaces. But we found a lot of the strategies that we were looking to employ or explore fell into one of these 3 categories. So one of them is scheduling adjustments. So I briefly mentioned that with the surveys. But this has a big impact both on the reason this conversation came up is we're thinking about staff retention, we're thinking about operational costs, thinking about how that actually impacts capacity. So this is beyond, it's reaching into things that are bigger than facilities. There's also instructional adjustments. So there's a lot of energy from the committee and that group thinking about what is the opportunity for us to pursue different learning opportunities for our students, what can we expose them to and provide them with. And putting that on the table in terms of, we talked a lot about this PCB curriculum and having more innovative programming, and what that looks like. And then the last one, facility adjustments, is a little bit more what you would think an architect does. Where could we build a building? Where would the addition would be? How big would it be? What would that cost? And start to look at that. And I'm going to go through kind of each of these categories, hopefully. And if you just have questions, interrupt us. But that there's more here. So when we think about capacity, one of the things we talked about is that, it's an opportunity to shift a schedule, gives you the ability to move more nimbly and faster than something like doing an addition onto a school would be. So there's an opportunity to increase capacity without actually changing anything about your facility, but actually changing the way you approach operations. So one of those opportunities would be a year-round schedule. So the way that this works is that top bar is demonstrating, here's your traditional schedule. You've got 9 months of school, traditional summer break. A single track, this is one way to do this, but it kind of breaks that up into what if we took a month off throughout the year? And the multi-track is saying, if you took a month off every year and tracked different students, you can fill the school throughout the whole year and increase the. So there is one track that is always not in school, that they're on a break in that moment, but the school is at its maximum functional.
What you're essentially saying is, how do we make use of the facility during those 3 months with additional, in that gray bar?
Yes. And you could do this in a way where there's still a 3-month break as opposed to a 1-month break. This is just an example. So when we look at what that means and how that applies to your facilities, it gives you approximately a 30% increase. Pretty high-level bird's-eye view studies, but it gives you an idea of what that kind of investment would mean. And we've just blanketed this across elementary, middle school, and high school. But gives you an idea of where you can start to increase. For reference, this number, I can't remember, but this would accommodate for that 30% of the 10-year growth.
The challenges with that, just real quickly, a lot of the summers, a lot of times when things get, when facility maintenance happens, that's when a lot of times you're doing boiler replacements or window replacements, whatever those things might be, that becomes very, very difficult. And it's always hard to do a lot of that stuff during the summer, but when you go to some schedule like that, that becomes a very difficult thing to just, a negative that I would point out about something.
It also wasn't super popular with your teachers.
Just another question about that, about the realities of that. One of the things we often hear is keep our winter break short here because of lower income people without access to heat outside of school. How would something like that be taking into account what to do about that sort of an issue, or is that no longer an issue? Do we now everybody can afford heat? Or has that been part of the conversation? That has not been part of the conversation.
Yeah, no, I don't know the answer to that. In
Okay.
this case, what you'd be doing is you'd be equalizing when people take breaks at different times, and it would be where they fall in that kind of alignment, I guess.
Okay.
I think you would find also that there's new challenges with this. If you're going to do something like this and you don't put AC in those schools, you are going to hear about it. So there's things like that. Where this is going to trigger further conversations, but it is on the table as an option. Another way to do this, so if we're not looking at the year, we can look at it on a weekly basis. So this is an example of a weekly schedule that's more like students are still in school 5 days, but there's 1 day where they might be off-site. So the best way I can think to compare this is like if you took students and they're all at the Ag Center on Mondays or Tuesdays or Wednesdays, and those students are grouped that way, it means that your elementary schools or your high schools are still full all of that time. You just relocated a portion of students to a different off-site location alongside that day. That makes sense.
What would, the Ag Center as an example, we're already kind of including that in our numbers. What would be some examples of off-site locations?
Elementaries are harder, it's much harder to imagine in elementary than at high school, right, where you could think they could be doing work-based learning, they could be out and things. So I think that's where, if you were gonna do this, you'd have to spend some time saying, how could we develop a program where students could be in a community center or something? Because if you have to go build an egg center to accommodate the students at an elementary, all you're really doing is building a classroom. Not to say that that's not, I mean, you've got a sustainability center, something that could be great, right? It could be a great learning mechanism, but you're still having to build something, right? If that's what you want to do, you have to build something. If you wanted to try to use the community, but the hard part about thinking about the community is, are they reliable year after year after year after year? And what happens if the economy goes down all of a sudden, your community might be hard to support them. That's just a hard thing to realize without having the space.
Were there any ideas for I mean, but I'm like, okay, elementary school, like, outside? I mean, like,
I would say outdoor
Is that-
learning is a possibility, or virtual learning, I think would be,
was there any other, like, are there any examples of, like, elementary schools that are doing it that we know of anywhere offsite, or?
our rooms doing outdoor.
There's always, these programs that are doing a lot of it are harder, they're always like one-off programs, not always, but a lot of times it's like, it's a charter school of some sort, or some special program related to, before charter schools became charter schools within the district, or in the state, but there was some sort of specialized programs, and so that's where you see some of that stuff modeled, more like a Montessori type thing. Harder to find it more in public education.
So similarly, the analysis on this, it does give you an increase of 25%, it's not the full 30% that you're seeing from, but there is a significant difference. And then the last one would be to have an alternate daily schedule, and this one gets tricky, just in terms of, I think you will want to ask a lot of follow-up questions about how exactly this works, and it is, years of us figuring that out at this point. Idea and a concept to be explored, but you would essentially have an early day and a late day so that you could kind of bulk up the school or have more students use the school throughout the day. So instead of everyone being in school from 8 to 3, you'd have some students in there from 7 to 2 and then 12 to 3. And there would be some overlap in that, like elective commons type space during the middle of the day, but it's going to give you more general ed kind of. One is really tricky to do in terms of how that increases your capacity, because it really depends on how you flesh out your curriculum and students and hours per day and what that might look like. It has the potential to give you the most, but I hesitate really even to show you this number because I don't think it's a perfectly representative. It would be dependent on how the district structures. Okay.
And as far as like staffing that, looking at 12 hours.
Not there the whole
So
time.
you would shift your staff with your students. So we've done some of that in the past. Early start, or late arrival, and then the teachers can follow that schedule. We used to start, we had some staff start at 7 and finish at 2. Students could actually choose to go from 7 to 5 if they wanted. So it allows just a lot of flexibility. And I think if you take a look at some of the charter schools that we put out there, that's a little bit of the model of what we put in there, just allowing that flexibility and choice.
I will know, if you want, we can share this, but we did send out the survey to staff, just to get an idea of where their interests were and what, might be the most compelling to them. By far and away, if there was an alternate schedule, the idea would be a 4-day work week. That was something that a lot of people were interested in. That's not necessarily weighed out what a traditional school year would be. A lot of people are attached to the traditional school year. I think the second highest ranking one was an alternate block schedule. So what that might look like, the year-round schedule was not popular for any reason. I do think what was important takeaways, in that survey was a lot related to, that people want the same time as their kids. So if there's an alternate schedule, that's something that really you're asking the community to shift towards, and it needs to be a bigger conversation, because obviously this will impact all parents and all things, and trying for parents to align those schedules and teachers. The other thing is that staff are facing, having the summers off gives them an opportunity to have a summer job, and to make income elsewhere. And so any changes that would be made, if you have 1 month off, periodically throughout the year, that's really hard for staff to earn additional income, and that's a takeaway that
It's like these alternative schedules are kind of aimed at the proposition that builds more facilities via a bond, right?
Yeah.
So the community would support a bond, so this would be a way that we could exist within our corridors.
This is the ammunition, right?
Yep.
To work, to talk to the community when they say, no, we don't want to support this. Well, here's another option, but this is, the students may be coming, we may be facing overcrowded schools, we may be facing issues. This might be what we have to do, right?
So on that, can you help me out? Which one was the 4-day work week?
I was, so that, the F is,
Yeah, these are not necessarily a 4-day work week, so that's actually unrelated. So that's an additional question layered on to this.
That's number 4.
oh,
Okay,
okay,
gotcha.
all right, this one was.
Yeah, this doesn't really represent it. I
Correct.
mean, in some ways it could represent that, but it's not representing
F could mean Friday.
that.
I think what you're asking though is exactly, I mean, it's a testament to you guys, because you're already up to speed on why this conversation got so tricky so quickly. Because it's like, if we are having trouble passing bonds or levies or building additions on the schools, are there other ways that we can ensure that we're meeting the needs related to capacity and students? And that's where things like this get brought into the conversation. But it is a hard conversation to have, because the implications of that continue to grow, and what that looks like is going to, require kind of an effort to weigh the model change. The 4-day work week, was added into the survey as a large part to acknowledge staff retention. And what are we doing to also make sure that your guys' strategic plan was set up very well in terms of, this isn't just about students, it is about everything else, and how can we also prioritize and ensure the voice of teachers. So, not all of these things are in perfect alignment right now. It is very much kind of this latest, and it's just a matter of which noodle you pick up.
And I think you're aware, many districts, we're seeing more and more districts going to this across the state, and it's becoming a competitive market of how are you attracting and retaining staff. And if other districts are doing it, and if your neighboring districts start doing it, how are you ready to tackle that? Maybe they make a little less money at that other district, but they only work 4 days a week. That could be something that's enticing. We're seeing it even in our industry, where we're going to closer to more and more 4 days a week.
When I had attended a class at MCEL on 4-day school weeks, and what they said, it was 100% about teacher retention. It's not about saving money, it's not about shuffling around kids, it's 100% saving the teachers that they have. It was hard to get started, they had a lot of pushback from their community, they had a lot of pushback from their teachers, but they said right now, they would never be able to go back because the teachers love it, and they will never go back to a five-day school week. So, but again, it was not about saving, and if they said, if you even think this is going to cut costs in some way, don't go down this route. It's about teacher retention. Jack?
So the dilemma that I see going forward is both capital and operational. So this is really addressing capital, and I don't think anything that you're doing is addressing operational. Have you gotten any insight into the operational, even though that's not part of your task?
I mean, one of the, as an example to your operational question is, you've got a number of elementary schools, right? And your elementary schools are, most of them are around a lot of them are 200 to 200 student schools, and you really can't fit many more students. 10 OPI allows you to build it, but 550 students with the same amount of administrators, the same amount of staff as you would have for 250 students. So you are probably operating 2 elementary schools right now. That could be 1 elementary school. The hard part about some of those elementary schools is they're very tight, they're very landlocked. To build a 500-student school on those is going to be very difficult. It can be done potentially, but from an operations standpoint, that's one example. If you were to take some of these schools that are in kind of these neighborhoods right around here and increase it to 500 students, you could probably start to see some operations.
Well, I saw you had some schematics in there adding to those. Would the classroom sizes be different in the additions to them versus the existing?
No, we base everything on a 900 classroom. So this is where it gets really messy, because I think where we were going with some of this elementary, like, and this is where we get to some of those, that survey related to, classroom sizes. 30 students in the class, or 30, students in a, 24 or 22, depending on elementary school. But a 900 square foot classroom is typical. But if you're really starting to move a shift in what these educational components could be as far as working in groups of 15 students or whatever, we actually took, as an example, I'm kind of foreshadowing here a little bit what's going on. We took Elrod, for instance, one wing of Elrod, and said, what if we took that wing as a very traditional wing of the school, and if we were to rearrange it, and actually the staff did this, the principals and teachers did this, and they said, what if we were to to rearrange this based on learning environments we want, we could actually increase the, capacity within those spaces and get the learning environments they want that aren't based on those 900 square foot classrooms. But the increase isn't enough to make it matter. My point of that is all to say that you have the opportunity in any of the schools to kind of rethink the educational environment and still maintain that capacity. You don't always have to just build a 900 square foot classroom. The answer to all this is yes.
Well, that's where I was wondering if the additions were gonna be larger than 900 square feet, like 12 or 1,500, in order to accommodate the, different types of instructional
Yeah, so we would plan, what we've done is a closer hybrid between what you're doing is class to class, but having flex areas, but we've accounted for additional space where if you were to break that up, it can still work.
What is the feasibility in these schools that are landlocked, like Elrod, in going up instead of out? Is that a complete tear down everything, or is that, and then start over again? And then if we were to do that, what would would there be, could you possibly put enough in the one that you go up with that you could sell the other property, you know what I mean, to offset the cost?
There isn't enough other property to sell.
No, so say two school, Elrod and Peterson, say they were close enough together, that you could increase the capacity of one enough to absorb those students and sell the other property.
Yeah, you're kind of in the minds of where the committee started to go with the elementary, say, what if we were to build more capacity? Potentially, there's potential there where the fifth grade lives, but regardless of that, the answer is yes, you could build denser. You would probably need to tear those facilities down. None of those facilities are just structurally capable of taking another floor or two on them. But, Montana doesn't have guidelines for the amount of property that an elementary school needs. Wyoming, Washington, Idaho do. For 500 student elementary school, the recommendation is between 8 and 10 acres, so that you can accommodate safe drop-offs, or playgrounds, proper parking, some of that stuff. I think Peterson or whatever might be on 2 acres or 1.9 acres. Some of these are on just really small, vacant land, or land where they might be next to a city park, your land. And so, my worry with this is if you go build a 500 student school on that land, you're gonna stress that property. You're gonna stress your neighborhoods related to drop-offs and those things, because you're just doubling that population. That's one of my inherent.
Makes sense.
It's built in there, and you also, the part about just stacking the structures, you gotta incorporate a couple. So when we started looking at those scenarios, it was really, hey, what's the worst part? Pull that out and build strategies identified, direction, but that's also a game because classrooms out to build a two. And your net 8. Build 16.
Okay, our team, I guess, if the board was to decide tonight to run a bond and have quick orders you could get in front of the community, what would be your prediction on by that new? So part of this exercise was because of this conversation, and we knew how complicated it would be, and even on best case scenario, if we agreed to run a bond, we passed a bond, we started construction, and we saw some of the growth projections that we're seeing, we would need to do something. So part of it was, what if the bond fails, and what do we do to increase capacity? But the other part of it was, what homework can we do now to be prepared for, even if a bond passes, what are we gonna do in the short term until we have new spaces?
Also part of showing the community that you are doing a capital project, they might have some operational impact. Or with the same, there's operational dollars attached to some of these strategies, so it's a big balancing act of creating capacity, building physical capacity. Student needs, what are the parents' needs, what are the needs, all kind of layer in.
I noticed you're essentially looking at stagger patterns. You're saying, can we stagger into June and July? Can we stagger into early morning and late night? What I noticed missing from your stagger patterns is Saturday, Sunday. Do you feel that there's more of an absolute set of community is Monday through Friday than there is it's 9 a.m. to 3 p.m.? Yeah, I'm just curious as why it doesn't look like you're even considering Saturday, Sunday.
I don't know, but you're gonna, it's so sacred that I didn't want knives thrown at me, but
In Montana, you can't have school on Sundays.
Saturday, then. I'm just saying that, you feel that Saturday is more sacrosanct than June, July, than 6 a.m., than 6
Yeah, I guess
p.m.
that'd be a question we'd have to ask, I don't think anybody even thought that was.
But you haven't even started talking. Okay, I was just curious if it was in the conversation at all.
It's just, so, Rankin is our newest school. Are there things that are at Rankin that seem to be working? Like, when Rankin was built, is it closer to what another school would look like? Or is everything already kind of so different that Rankin isn't? I don't want to say it's not working. I mean, it's working, but is it closer to what we would go for, or really not?
I think it's along the model of what we've seen being built right now, just consistently. I think what your teachers and staff are doing we're pushing the limits of envelope of saying, to the degree of saying, what if we didn't own a classroom? What if a teacher did not own a classroom? That they worked as a core to collaborate better as a team, that they took up maybe what we would call a learning neighborhood or a learning block, where they as teachers work together to say, space we're specific. And if we're gonna do, I'm talking elementary, for instance, here. If we're gonna do an art project, we have a messy space. If we're gonna do a presentation space, we have the presentation, we're gonna have the right presentation, or a clean space, or whatever those things might be, that those activities that they wanna do, that they have the right spaces for them. Right now, a typical classroom is divided in a lot of elementary schools into quadrants. We have reading, you know what I mean? They're just in quadrants. We do better, as I think, from a learning standpoint, from a space. I think that's what they're trying to say, and then teachers then would collaborate in that manner. But Rankin, I think, is a hybrid. That's kind of it's the next thing that's closest to that.
Do you get that, and Matt, you might know this, does Marissa feel like, do the teachers at Rankin feel like that space is working like that, or is it too in between?
It actually came up as a really good example of what happens when you build a space with some architectural concepts that you never train the teachers or expose the teachers to what that space was designed for.
Okay.
So when we're talking about, when we did these exercises with our staff, there was a lot of excitement from our staff of, wow, this would be really handy. When we surveyed them, they said, this is actually what we prefer. But there was no coordination of getting a group of teachers together and then showing them other schools that use space like that, and then giving them time to work together, plan, and then actually implement it. Upstairs in Rankin, it was designed to where one whole wing of that building can be open and used as this big collaborative space, and we could arrange any way we want. The staff was never kind of brought up to awareness to be able to do that. So as soon as they opened the space, they just took the temporary doors and shut them, and they've probably never been open since.
Right.
When Elrod was remodeled, there was a room that was remodeled with a sliding glass door in it. And then just recently, there was a request to sheetrock the door so that one room couldn't see into the other room. Well, the whole purpose of the design, right? So it highlights that these changes are both structural and they're also, concept, training, implementation. And I don't think there's a lack of willingness from staff. It just takes some exposure and training to make it happen.
The other thing to add to that too that we talked about is that because there is a range, is that some of these things that might be more innovative could be in different spaces. So that if we were to design a project, that doesn't necessarily mean that the design has to adhere to one philosophy or one pedagogy. It could be where there is a range so that you can suit and fit teachers where they're going to work best, so that the district can be a little.
This is not an uncommon thing. We actually had an opportunity to go to a conference in Chicago that was purely about learning environments. And it's education environments in Los Angeles to San Francisco, Chicago, you name it. Common theme that we were hearing a lot of speakers talk about was educating teachers on how to use spaces more differently. And some of these, there were specialists there that their whole job was to help work with us as architects and you as educators of being that middle ground of saying, let's create a curriculum around this space. how do we collaborate, how do we do these things together? Versus here's your space, figure it out, and I think that's the missing link, I think, in a lot of, we're designing even today of like, how do you create that link of how do you.
So how has that changed your professional development curriculum schedule?
Do you get the dot in your email?
Yes?
Next time you see the dot circle around, sign up for boot camp. So we are rolling out what it looks like to, take on the major concepts of personalized competency-based education. And the first thing is just, what we affectionately call boot camp, and it's an onboarding. The name that doesn't apply, it's just kind of a basic training on what it looks like, what are the guardrails and parameters, and then from there, individuals or teams can explore a concept in a deeper way, and we put them on a launch team, and those launch teams travel somewhere, see something in action, study it, bring it back, present, share out to the other staff. And so that's one of the ways we're scaling up the work, but it does take a comprehensive knowledge before you start to implement it. I like, what we said of just piloting some things. In our charter school applications, it's riddled with those types of things. We want to, the community day. We're doing that with our extended classroom experiences. We had Chow present a couple times. We have lots of our students doing lots of activities that aren't on one space every day, but it's just using all of the opportunities in our community. It's not hard for me to imagine that we could scale that up and that we could see students once a week, not in their building, in our charter school application. That's what it looks like, it's a community embedded experience. And then not to jump all over the place, but when we were talking about that calendar with the 4 day week, it could be that, or it could be a longer day, and the 4 day work week, when we think of it traditionally, everybody has Friday off. Well, what if your day off was Tuesday, your day off was Wednesday, your day off was Thursday, but we're increasing the capacity of the building? Again, not the perfect solution to all the problems, but, there are lots of complementing factors that take some knowledge. Bottom line, Jack, sign up for boot camp. Love to have you.
I signed up.
December 13th, next to.
Can I just make a comment? I hear about you talking about, Chicago, LA doing things. And I see all the good things we're doing here. The piece I see, I haven't heard much discussion on, is at the state level. I recently had the opportunity to do a lot of traveling with our interim education committee, the legislators from around the state. And this is such a good timing for this discussion because they are so supportive of innovative ideas going on in our schools. And I think they are willing to redo some funding at this level to see these innovations happen. And I see so much of, traditional education, and we're just trying to, put a square peg in a round hole. No, we need to do some innovative things, and I truly think we will see some funding behind that. I know, our superintendents have the same discussions that I have, and it's pretty exciting to see the possibilities, the pilot programs that we could do. But I would love for you guys to get together with the interim education committee and talk with them.
Yeah, I think Montana.
Oh, yeah.
Montana's right for, it just needs someone to do it. Once someone does it, others can see it, that's what's gonna happen, right? And then the hard part is, we're seeing other districts outside of Montana doing it. I think you have a great program. Little sparks and a lot of energy. Flames in the flame. I think this one might.
That's so good in Townsend.
Vermont Egan.
Yeah. Fairmont Egan.
Yeah.
I thought you were very.
Not yet, just Fairmont.
Kind of a continuation of what I'm hearing here. I know that we're coming at this from, we might run out of space, we might have to do some of these things. I was kind of wondering if there were any of them excite you more? And have you heard, like, is there research behind that any of these would be best for the kids? Obviously, we might have to do them regardless, but it'd be great if it was reversed.
Yes. So just to be clear, what we're pursuing is what we know to be the best educational model across the world.
Okay.
So we're not like, inventing something new. If anything, we're compiling the best research of the last 2 decades and putting it into practice, and then stealing from the schools that are producing the best results. When we were at Edgerton for the site visit recently, one of the things we had an opportunity to see is just how we group students differently when you know you've made it really clear what you expect kids to know and be able to do, and then you give some sort of assessment that's an onboarding assessment. Instead of using that just to measure growth, you now use that to start instruction. So not all kids start at the same spot. They start at what they need, and then when they struggle with the concept, they have a place to go to get support with that concept. They don't get stuck in an intervention for a 6-week block of time. It's now just a real time in, real time out. And when you start thinking of education happening that way, you think of how a classroom gets used differently. And so if you're a teacher facilitating learning like that, you need a space for a group of 10 students, but you also need lots of spaces for kids to work independently. You need a space for kids to work in some small groups. You need spaces for kids to be able to collaborate with their peers that are a grade level above or a grade level below. And so that's where we found some efficiencies actually in the model. And I know Brad said it wasn't enough to really move the needle on the price and the construction and the kind of that math, but it was enough educationally to move the needle to be worthy of a remodel. So if you had a space, and we identified several schools that had spaces where they were coming up on this other assessment of we need to do something with the space because it's dated, we wouldn't just replicate it and recreate the space as it currently exists with new carpet, right? We would remodel it in a way that would facilitate a different way of learning. And kind of that snowballs back to the previous discussion is in pockets, we have teachers learning how to do this, and then it would become, how do we organize those teachers with other teachers that are ready for this, model it in small pilot sections, and move on from there. But I'm glad you asked the question. I was really glad to hear Sue comment about what the state's talking about, because these aren't isolated conversations. We're not talking about trying to do something neat in education and then trying to dream up some cool spaces. What we're trying to do is create the best educational model for our students and pursue the highest level of excellence in everything we do. That's the goal. If it requires us to reshape some building in some different way, and that's what it's telling us to do, that's what I would advocate for.
So there is some research out right now, there's tons of like papers out related to, some of the data is really early, because you're seeing some of these shifts now more recently. So it's something we're trying to do more and more of, like tracking our facilities after we've done, and then I'm saying, okay, let's watch 5 years, how are the students' attendance for one thing, how is their attendance doing, how is their math scores, or however we want to measure that stuff related to academics. Some of early indications are saying that it is having a very positive impact on kids reading at higher levels, performing better on math at higher levels, retention, just showing up better, just overall mental health is improving if the spaces are right. And a lot of that is not just space, but things related to even things like
Other thing I'd add to that too is, like, to the credit of your committee, what we're not showing you, because this is the abridged version, is there were 3-4 meetings and multiple meetings just talking about really educational visioning and this idea of what this potential could be. And I feel like every solution that has been brought to the table has put those things above capacity or above resolution or above that. It's been, what is the educational quality first, and then how also can we support that with these other challenges that we're facing. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of try and go through instructional investments quickly, only because I think we've touched on a lot of the facility things, so I just want to support that conversation that we're already having. This is the most consolidated way I can demonstrate a lot of the survey we did around teaching and students. So on the left here, you'll see kind of a traditional model where you have your primary classroom, you have a library center with a community lab or a computer lab, and then you potentially maybe have a small group flex space where you might have a one-on-one have large groups, small groups, a media center, open space, and think about how students are grouped in those spaces and then what those activities are. A messy space, a presentation space, a clean space, a lab space. And then what that also does, it actually changes the way that support looks, where that's not just about a closet, but also what are teachers doing to collaborate with each other, not just, and kind of altering that conversation. The other thing that we talked about is, I think to your question earlier, is like, we're gonna go back and remodel a spaces, and it's just 10 more 900 students, or 900 square foot classrooms. But actually, maybe it's not just for every student, but could we assign some specificity and focused areas to different aspects of the school? So maybe Edgerton has a performance theater, and Elrod has drones and robotics, and Rankin has a life science center, and there's a way to expose students to these different specific curriculums, and coming at it from that angle in terms of what are the instructional opportunities where we can kind of lean into these different pieces and enhance the student. And then also adding that conversation to the high school, so building on that. This was a part of Voice and Choice, but also we spent a lot of time talking about what are the opportunities for work-based learning or dual enrollment learning, and partnerships with Flathead Valley Community College and other partners within the community as well, and reaching out to them is how can we continue to expose students to things outside of our walls, and giving them an opportunity to have a voice in their own education. I'm going through this really fast. And then facility adjustments. So this is a little bit of everything. So to Matt's point earlier, one of the things that we did is, okay, let's play out an entire scenario of if we were trying to resolve for X amount of students, what would that start to look like? Everything that I'm showing you from here on out is an example. This slide in and of itself is probably a part of a different 50-slide presentation where we had about 7 different ones of these, but it's just thinking, what if we realigned grade levels to be K4, and then we built a new 5-8 middle school and added that way, and then how do you add on to, in this case, because of the conversation related to how do we reach and maximize that 500 student capacity so that we are acknowledging operational costs, get the smaller schools into a higher bracket of students and resolve that way. So in this case, we're actually, Elrod was going to be taken offline. You realign grades to be K4 and 5-8, build a new middle school, and then do additions onto Peterson, Russell, and Hedges. And what it starts to look like, and part of the reason we did this exercise is because it is a long process. It is not simple to just say we're going to do this today and then we'll figure it out tomorrow. This timeline takes you out to 2029, especially when you start thinking about if we're renovating those schools, where do those students go? And there's differences between if I build an addition that doesn't impact the new school versus if I take something down and renovate it, then I have to accommodate for those students. And this spirals really quickly. I could talk about this for a long time. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to say that these are the kinds of considerations that the committee is being really thoughtful about. What is the long-term impact as we look out? So within that project study, what we did is, okay, if we did renovate Hedges to get to 500 students or Peterson or Russell, what does that look like? These are not design exercises. We would never take this and give it to a contractor and say, build it. It's really just for budgeting purposes and spatial purposes of what can fit on the site and potentially how much would that cost us. You'll notice I made the print really small, so you can't read the top, but they're there. I think the other thing about this is it's not intended to be exclusionary. There's absolutely a way to take these and approach it and say, can we apply this innovative programming model to that and accommodate those students? Absolutely. This is really just an exercise to kind of test it, what it might be. So this is what we were talking about in terms of altering that traditional model. So this is actually something really come up with by the committee. All we did was facilitate it. This is taking the wing of Elrod and reimagining a complete renovation of that. So that top is a traditional model. That's what it looks like today. And what we see is you've got this 30-person classroom, and that's where students live, and that's pretty much where they stay. This collaborative model, and we have 3 or 4 different options of this, is actually saying, what if these classrooms look a little bit different? So basically, we gutted the whole thing. And what this is doing is this type of space can accommodate a larger group of students so that you could get 40, 50, 60 students in there. And then those are supported by these small group spaces, so there's an opportunity for a teacher to supervise smaller groups within one area. And then this can also be divided into two separate classes. You're offering that traditional classroom model, but you're also saying you have access to these different spaces. In this case, this is replicated kind of 3 times. And then what we're seeing right here is kind of a teacher pod. So in this instance, there's not teachers owning a classroom. What it gives is your teachers just kind of, they have a central work area where they can work with each other. That's supported by this kind of more open, free work media type space. This larger group resource lab, this larger presentation space. I could talk about this for an hour and no one wants to hear that. But I think what's valuable about this is because it does require a big cultural shift from your teachers, what it also enables is, instead of saying, this is my classroom, my space, this is how I use it, is you're saying, I have access to 6 different spaces. I just need to work collaboratively with my team to get my students to do the right thing and exercise.
That goes back to your survey too, and the number one, hey, what do you as a staff member value most out of your work experience? And it was 84% across the board was to collaborate with teachers and staff. So that's what they're wanting. And it goes back to what Matt talked about is we, we have to provide those opportunities for our staff. And as you guys go out on, some of these, these tours and how we've changed that up a little bit, I think you'll see that a little bit. Matt didn't talk about it, but Edgerton was a perfect example with what they're doing in some of their.
A great point. So this is actually shifting the conversation a little bit to high school. So same kind of exercise in terms of what fits within those spaces. This was very specific in terms of what some of those more immediate needs were. So you'll see the flathead conversation is geared a little bit more towards what can we do for green space or parking and providing that opportunity, versus Glacier, we're starting to think about what are the opportunities for a weight room, and some of those more specific elective programs. And then Linderman and the BOAG Center, each of those had different needs where we focused on that school specifically and tried to apply that within the boundaries of that site and their program. But how can we maximize these facilities to operate at their highest? Don't get to see the next.
It's just like a giant number.
So,
We're not showing you any numbers.
let me ask you a question since,
Yes.
since it's an issue right now, Legends Field and access to it, has that been,
It'll be addressed, it's just not in this, but we did meet with, our athletic director, we talked about, that facility specifically. We're gonna talk about what are some things to think about there, but we don't have like a plan related to, what are you building, how are you building something? It's pretty presumptuous for us to kind of pre-plan something, but we have had some conversations around what you think about.
That will kind of be more included in the. This is Peter's favorite thing, and like, because he gets fired up about it, so it's good. One of the other things we explored related to the high school is the Center for Career Discovery, which is, and kind of what that would look like in terms of supporting the high school and the opportunities for that. So this is, again, the very abbreviated version, but what we did is, we, based on that high school survey, we kind of categorized 5 potential tracks for high school students to pursue exposures to various careers, and that included this healthcare, design and innovation, public impact, trades and manufacturing, and outdoor sciences. Each of those has, 10 different sub-bullet points of what that might look like. But we facilitated and brought in large representative of the community that fall within each of these buckets to actually contribute to that conversation. And we had a really important and I think valuable dialogue about what they can contribute, what they're seeing, what they would like to see, and what the potential is. And it's just thinking about how do we further engage the community and bring them. And we did kind of explore that idea as well, just in terms of if we are to think about what this would mean in terms of if we were to try and pass a bond or partner with a different entity. The building designed in a vacuum, so it's just, we would love to build it, but, assigned $18,000.
One thing I would point is that was a very energized group that came out of it. Had probably 2 or 3 different community members, stopped us at the end and said, if it does this, it will. 3 different, just didn't even ask for their feedback, they just said, and it was related more, just bluntly, to some of the, more of the trades in manufacturing. There was a lot more people in the room from that standpoint. And some of the survey didn't show a huge pie, like, interest in that. But what was interesting from their feedback, that they were privy to some of that information from the students, where they don't believe that the exposure, that these students are getting the exposure, or even the, understanding of what it means to go into some of those professions. Because you take a shop class, does that really mean you're building a house, or does that really mean you're evolving, you're going to be doing that? There's so many other different opportunities beyond that. And what was interesting is they said, we want the kids to get this exposure, but we also want them to have the soft skills. We want them to also have an entrepreneurial spirit behind it. So we can't just give them the space without having some of these other things behind them, of understanding what it means to take these classes. Could be what that could mean. So there was a lot of energy that came out of that room, a lot of support. Saying this has a lot of momentum in there. They felt it.
Especially that group right there. They were really excited and they really wanted to be a part of it.
Yes, and they said coming from back from keeping, they
Yes.
don't want it to be a one-time conversation. They said we want more conversation.
So we're kind of getting to the summary here, and the way that we've started to look at this is we don't think there is one, magic bullet solution. And it's probably pretty obvious to everyone in this room that there's not magically tie this into anything. But we do think that there is an opportunity, given how much has been explored, if we start to think about this as a continuum, it might be a little bit of, we make this schedule change and this investment in structural change, it will impact our facilities. And so thinking about this kind of range and opportunity of how this might be approached, and as you guys think about this in the future, is like, what is the right balance of those items? So these are kind of the extreme left and right. So that top one would be, we could completely change the schedule, we don't make any changes to our facilities, and that would have, X, Y, and Z implications that we as a district would start to tackle, versus the opposite one would be that option 3, where they schedule stays as is, instruction stays as is, we just build our buildings to be a little bit bigger. That might be, to start to accommodate what the district. Let me keep going because this conversation builds on itself. This is everything in the most consolidated way that we can think to kind of capture what the committee has been looking at for the last 10 months. And you can see that the conversation starts to branch out into a lot of different what ifs really quickly. And so that's part of the reason, we're thinking about, okay, what comes next and how do we start to bring this together, of where do we put our priorities. I think the most important thing is that we're still measuring ourselves back against the strategic plan. As I said, you guys spend a lot of time and energy looking at that, evaluating that, and investing in that for your district. We're really treating this as the rubric with which to work. I think the other thing that we've kind of touched on at this point is we want these things to work together. So there's a certain amount of curriculum design or student learning or instruction models that we can't comment on, but we want to make sure that what we're doing is in support of those strategies. What has been so energizing for us in this project that's super exciting is it really does feel like innovation and visioning in a way that we are not frequently exposed to. And I think it's commendation to you guys as a team, as you really are looking forward. We are well aware that this district is facing more than one challenge, but I think it's the fact that you guys are in this spot and doing this kind of discovery and visioning now speaks highly of what you guys are pursuing, and that this is a worthwhile investment. So this is the series that we put together, but we wanted to show you is there an opportunity to start to break down how all these things start to interplay together? And essentially what this is kind of a massive decision tree, and it is not intended to point you in one specific direction or say yes or no to any way to try and, how can we look at all of these context changes to another? So overall, what this is doing is saying, we want to be able to understand these decision points and how those decision points might impact some of the other elements of the conversation. The goal is also that you wouldn't necessarily have to move specifically in one direction, that you could start at any point and kind of plug numbers in either way. The first one out on the farthest left is capacity. It's not saying that capacity is most important, but it has the largest ripple effect as you move through and the implications of what that will do as you continue to look at these other. The second one is thinking about alternative schedule. So if you opt to alternate schedule or not, create an alternative schedule, that will have this kind of larger ripple effect to everything else. And then instructional alignment, and then you get to facilities actually, which speaks to, again, the goal of we want facilities to respond to the educational objectives in your curriculum rather than your facilities designing everything else for you. And then last is this kind of approach of saying, okay, if we are going to design a new facility, is it this very innovative program model? Is it something more traditional? Is it a little bit of both? So what we have following this, if you guys are still following, I think this is a little bit easier, is we've put together just a couple examples of what this might look like. So if we start very far on the left, you'll see kind of in pink, we've just put some numbers and plug them in there and follow that through. So if we go up and look at elementary and say, let's say we want to plan for 700 new additional elementary students. Okay, that's one choice that we have decided to then make. Do we want to make a schedule change or no? In this case, you're saying, no, we don't want to change the schedule. But what we do want to do is have a new alignment of grades. So we want to go K4, 5, 8 instead of K5, 6, 8. And then you're saying, well, I still have to track these 700 students, so I'm going to accommodate for the 700 new students in a new middle school. That's a new elementary or an elementary addition, and then I might do that through very traditional programs. Just a way to say, how can I start to look at all of these things together? Same thing for the high school. So it's really about putting in, okay, we have 600 students, we're not changing the schedule. I might do some of those students through, 100 at Glacier and 100 at Flathead, but I'm going to build a 400-student career discovery center, and then what that might look like. This all makes sense.
What we're trying to do is, there's a lot of stuff out there, let's talk about that. How do you organize it? How do you organize it so you can do it? We're not asking you to make decisions.
No.
We're not asking you to do that. What we're saying is, here's ways to just review this thing, to look on it on a spectrum, saying, here are the things you need to consider as a board. You could say the facility thing, many things before them are not really facility related. They're scheduled, they're things which every district should be talking about, and well before you get to a facility. We pride ourselves on is, you give us the curriculum, what you want to do from an education standpoint, we'll build and design the space around it. We want to nurture that, whatever that is. We just build a space and you're trying to force a curriculum into it, sometimes that can be a lot harder. And it's not, curriculums have changed, right? So flexibility is key, but it's like if you have some attention what you're trying to do, we can build it up.
I have a question. So Scott and I kind of had sticker shock on our, just remodels of Hedges, Peterson, and Russell. If we're looking at like $38 million to remodel Hedges, what on earth would a full new building?
Well, so yeah, this is a great thing. So right now, I mean, Laurel, for instance, $57 million passed the bond in May. That is buying them a brand new elementary school and addition to. Right now, Belgrade is looking at a bond in May. They're looking anywhere between. What we saw from like 2015 through 2020-ish was around $225 to $250 a square foot. COVID, nope, do you have it? Yeah. COVID came and hit, and, well, that's not the right word, but, we've seen that escalate anywhere between 30 to 55%. And so, for instance, Lolo, the K-8 school down the road, Long Road, but I guess that came in around $391. Laurel, we're planning $400. No, this isn't even comparable, but Big Sky School District, if you want some sense of relief, was $556. These are the realities that we're living in today, unfortunately, and, it's scary, but our lead right now, our lead down the road is coming in around 356, so that is some good look. So it's better, but you can see that range is way different than when you got the bond however many years ago, what you're buying.
The three buildings, just for clarification, they weren't just also expanding.
But they are still, well,
model.
Well, we needed to do that, to be honest, we needed to do that because the committee needed to understand, like, this is a big ask.
Yeah.
But some of the things that you're looking at, which I think then triggers the schedule stuff, triggers some of that other stuff, did you know your committee?
No, and I love that. It's good to know because it'd be easy for us to be like, yeah, let's go for a bond. But when you're talking numbers like this, you know, we need to look at all aspects.
Yes.
Okay.
It's super hard for us on our side of it. We wish we could control construction. Reality is between 2014. Pretty tough to swallow.
The other thing I would add to that too is I think there's been a lot of thoughtful discussion. What is the solution that gets us to tomorrow versus what is the right solution that is worth the investment? And so thinking about, you know, are we gonna spend $10, $20 million on this renovation, or are we gonna spend $30 million on something? Just having that be a part of, you know, this is long-term planning, long-range planning, and it might mean that there are some short-term fixes and whatnot, but there's also making sure, are we pursuing the right things for the district, and meeting the current needs of the district?
I wish Laurel was building the Cosmo Hall. I mean, they're building a very nice school, don't get me wrong, like, they're building a great school. But we're having to be very, thoughtful and very specific about what we're doing, and we're having to make concessions here and there, right, to make sure it's $125 a square foot, you're not building these, like, there's gonna be a beautiful school, but they're just not like vastly overscaled and you know.
You would think that for that money, you wouldn't have to make concessions.
You would think.
Got anything you want.
Yeah. Like old toilets.
This is out of all the nights that it would have been handy to have the media here, they're not. But, are you guys working, I don't know if they're working with the district right now on getting this information out to the public? Because my understanding of the public is that they don't like the one and done, you know, I just see this today and I'm gonna make a decision tomorrow. But getting this stuff in front of them now, having maybe a KPS corner in the paper or something where they could get this information in little bits so that they're ready for a bond. You know, like start working on the community now, even though we're not near the bond, but for
The bond
instance.
starts here, you are exactly right.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been lucky in having worked with a lot of successful bonds, but your bond work starts now, right? You're doing this work now, so that you can present it. Right, your community needs to know what plan A, B, C are, and D, and because they're not gonna go plan A, and they need to understand that you can look.
Well, and they need to hear it more than once.
Yeah.
Once isn't gonna make it. So if this was something that they got the little piece on, you know, it's 3 years away, if we decided today that we were gonna do something, and if they got the little piece that, we're looking at, you know, if we don't get this going to, you know, an alternative schedule. I mean, these are little things that, you know, in the paper once a week or once every couple weeks, once a month would help in going forward with the bond, I think.
Let's go on our social media.
I don't know that we
Meeting,
can
we
put up
post
50
those
slides.
You know. Well, not all 50 slides, but
Just pick
I'm
your
just
favorite
kidding.
one.
We
I
can-
mean, what we've done leading up to bonds, and this is truly a bond campaign, which we're not, right, is start this education with informational, just presentation.
Mhm.
Put it on social media or something there, and then someone can watch it anytime. The hardest part right now is you go out to your community right now and you say, come listen to us, we wanna talk to you about things we're doing, who's gonna show up?
Nobody.
You're probably gonna have a hard time getting people to show up, there's controversy, but, so anything you can do, we're always privy to, we're always looking for different ideas to get community right, they do need to start. Inevitably to do something, whether 3 years or 5 years from now, or 2 years from now, or a year. From now, right?
Serve barbecue, people come if you put up a grill.
Actually, let's say, just start a crazy rumor and then have people.
Oh, by the way.
A question about the CCD, is that something that people, that would be their school, like Lindemann or like
No.
Glacier, or like, they would just go there for a portion of it?
Yeah.
Is that the understanding? So you could almost do like a hybrid, because I'm looking through the scenarios, and it's like, it seems like to have a CCD, you really need a schedule change, right? Where people have some modification of their schedule, so they have free time to go spend 3 hours at CCD in the afternoon.
He was ready for this one.
Yeah.
He's been waiting for that question.
I was going for it. You can have it.
I mean, I guess I would see it, just a lot of things that we've talked about, trying to do a lot of partnerships with, Flathead Valley Community College, and even looking with, some of the other school districts, but I would see it set up, pretty much the same way as the Ag Center. So we'd say, the Ag Center South and the, CCD, North, where students can access it either most of the day, part of the day, or, whatever they choose, with the flexibility that we've been given with schedules, they can even stay out there, the entire day, and maybe taking even some classes, some running starts, some dual enrollment. We could have, our communications, our math, and some different things out there, and how we, roll that out to students. So that's where a lot of the conversations have been.
Are we concerned about fully utilizing that space? Because if we don't mandate that, go out there for a portion. Well, I'm gonna do English, science, math here, but then I wanna go do this,
They should join the church.
I said we'll fill it with,
Right now, we're trying to get Kane to build it.
Well,
So, and actually, that's been the conversation is, developing that partnership with her. We're starting small, so I can already tell you, some of the things have already been put in place. So, we've talked about adult education instead of working in silos. So, we have adult education funding, and so we want to house our adult education coordinator up there. We want to do, adult ed classes, but they have, continuing ed, so why not partner with them? We've fleshed out some partnerships, with, say, like their HVAC program, where students can go up there and take 2 HVAC programs or 2 classes, and then, get into an internship or maybe a paid internship, and then earn a micro-credential. We had a conversation, was it yesterday, Randy? But it's been a long week, it's Tuesday. Still got turkey brain. So, we talked about, getting together with some of the other districts and, focusing on, healthcare and informational technology. So we're gonna start on healthcare and developing a pathway. What classes do we have, here, at Flathead High School and Glacier High School that would marry up with some of the things that they're doing, at Flathead Valley Community College, so the students get the prereqs. So, a part of it is not even building a building, but, establishing, that foundation so that we already have it in place. So when we're ready to go, we could, and then we could expand. We've talked about, in fact, Lindsay, Napier brought it up at Flathead High School. Hey, we have 2 really good project lead the ways, at Flathead and Glacier. But, Flathead's isolated to biomed, and, Glacier's isolated to, engineering. Why couldn't that be up, at a place like, the CCD, where students from both schools are accessing it and making it even more robust? So,
what about like virtual options?
there would even be some virtual options where students could take, classes online. We already offer that through some of our English classes, with, Jenna Brown. She works out of Glacier and then out of the Ag Center, so that's a portion of it is offering some of those online.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that virtual. Like,
Well, through our transformational learning grant and the PCBE work, that we've done, and the flexibility that the legislature has given us, it's really opened up the doors, and, they've jumped on some of that, as far as, taking a look at, some of the things that we want to accomplish. So they've, changed, and that's why we've been looking at the spaces a little bit different, but it's even opened up more, even within the last year or two, and, the opportunities. It takes a little bit of time to get there.
It's a real challenge. I mean,
Matt's got a lot of great ideas.
Matt,
Matt, you're up.
here's your softball. What do we do on the elementary side? Because, I mean, absent building something, I just don't. On the high school side, we do not build something. And on the elementary side, we have to.
I think part of the problem is we've never envisioned doing elementary school differently, and we've never given options have some choice in what they want their elementary students to participate in and not participate. Traditionally just offered, sign up, you get the whole thing, and we're not really that flexible. But inside of our charter applications, one of the things we highlighted is, surveying and communicating with the parents that do want to explore it, and then asking them what they want. Do you want to go days a week and have virtual a couple days a week? Do you want to have a carte? Do you want to have this a la carte where you pick and choose? I think, when I mentioned this the first time, I think traditional education bristles a little bit about that because we assume that we know best for making those wholesale decisions for other people's families. Bring that back and giving that choice and voice to those parents. Don't know what we're going to get. So I can't really predict that side of it, but I would suggest that there might be a group of parents that want to start their kids later in the day, and they'd be fine with their kids going later. I think there might be a group of parents that want some support with different content areas, but want their kids at home different times. We had that schedule that had that overlap time. I'm not sure how many elementary kids would get early in the morning. That's kind of a stretch on that schedule, but I can see if we had more flexible time in the middle of the day, there might be a group of parents that want their kids to come home for lunch and be with them during the middle part of the day and then come back to school. We just never offered it. So on the schedule side and then how we structure and organize, I think that we're interested in the feedback we get from parents. But I think also, just pushing back on this idea that we need to have elementary kids in a building all day because we live in Montana. There's a school in Wisconsin that doesn't have a building, right? And it's Wisconsin, so it gets cold in Wisconsin in the winter, and they still take the summers off. They don't own a building. They're every day outside. And so if they can figure out how they're running school every day outside, we could probably figure it out one day a week when the majority of our time we'd probably be in a space in our community inside. We're building that, and we've been building those opportunities. So I think that there's a flexibility even in a traditional structure for how we manage and schedule our community-embedded experiences. And when we talk about at the high school side, how the constant feedback, every time we talk about the Center of Career Discovery, is that what you call it? CCD. But the constant feedback has been super positive because people have said, we want our kids to learn these skills, these academic skills, but we also want them to learn these soft skills, and we want them to have these experiences where they're introduced to careers, right? Universal, everybody loves it. Courtney Sprunner has run some legislation very successfully around garnering new funding for our programs in our state. On the elementary side, when we talk to parents about student agency, and when people grapple with, we want our children from a very young age to have a clear picture of knowing what they need to learn, and then advocating for themselves about the best way to acquire that new knowledge or acquire that skill, and those independent skills, those communication skills, those collaborative skills. We've heard universally from parents, yes, please. We want more of that. And so when we're building these education programs, and we're talking about how we're incorporating community and we're incorporating choice, and we're making the student more aware of what their responsibility is, I think on the elementary side, we have a ton of potential that we haven't even tapped into. And when we visited these other schools, that's what they're doing, and that's what their programming looks like. So, Ursula's question earlier, are we seeing the test scores or kind of the implication, or are we seeing the achievement? Yes, they're learning more, they're achieving higher, they're testing higher, but they're also leaps and bounds ahead in advocacy and ownership and experiences and pathways to explore career fields before they graduate high school. They're doing it in college, they're doing it while they're in middle school, doing it while they're in high school. So anyway, I get just as excited about it on the elementary side. I think we'll be surprised with.
Does that solve the sheer number issue?
No. But, and I think that, Jack brought up probably the key point tonight was that we have these operational costs that are linked up to some facility issues. And it's an anchor on the elementary budget, frankly, because we have these sites that were built for a different time and era. And, the cost per student at those sites is magic wand, all of our schools be right around 450. From an educational standpoint, from a staffing standpoint, the budgeting model, that's what it looks like. Well, I know OPS is up to 500, 550, but 450 is really the number for me. And we have a couple of those sites, Peterson, Elrod, Russell, that don't have the potential to get there, and even Hedges. Hedges would be a stretch to get to that. It's a tough choices, you know, that led us on a discussion of talking about the middle school and second middle schools and, you know, what that looks like. And on one hand, it's hard to see fifth graders and eighth graders in the same building, and people wrestle with that. But the continuity of having a kid for 4 years outweighs the cost of just putting fifth and sixth graders in a different building. Then you increase the capacity, and then that triggers what Mary showed was that graph of you could do the second middle school, abandon one elementary site, remodel those other sites. And from a facility standpoint, that gets us to a much better spot. But more importantly, on an operational cost perspective, that gets us to a much better space because we're more efficient in how we're programming and providing programming for kids. If we maximize some of the other flexibilities I talked about previously, I think that just expands it, right? We're using the current middle school facility every classroom 5 of 7 periods. That's not a really efficient occupational capacity, but it's a big building. So if we cram more kids in there, I don't know if that solves the problem. I wish we had that problem at like Elrod, where we could just add kids, but we don't have that capacity option. But a long answer to your short question.
Yeah, I mean, because obviously it's all kind of being driven from the first slides about growth and what we're anticipating for growth and how we're going to have plans or schedule or learning models. And, you know, I mean, while the learning models are exciting and, I mean, they don't solve our number problem. That's, I mean, and you have to, so, whether it be an outdoor school 1 day out of the week or something, but we need to figure out how to deal with the sheer numbers. So, I don't know, it seems like on the elementary side, we have to do something. Correct?
Yeah, we've talked about, update on personalized competency-based education being on the September agenda, October agenda, November agenda, and we've pushed it every time because of other priorities, and you know how much I love talking about all of them. But this, we bumped up this meeting as soon as we could to have this conversation, to put it in front of this board, because this is part of the big vision of what do we want as a district and where are we going as a district, the big vision. And that vision is going to drive what plans and what options we pursue. I think in the short term, we're going to have to make some choices that maybe don't align to the long-term vision, because the construction timelines and the shifting require us to be flexible with scheduling and doing some things that maybe don't align with that bigger vision. But we need to clarify what the big vision is and where we're going and what we want to pursue as a district, so that when we have this need to do something, we know what we're doing. We can make short-term cost decisions to get us through, but until we articulate the big vision, we're always going to be spinning around. If we don't have a plan, what's going to be the plan is portable buildings, hurry to deal with something at some date. And we could argue about, you know, if we're looking in the rearview mirror at 1.5% growth, or if we're using this 5% growth, at some point, these apartment complexes that are rising up around us are going to be full, and we're going to have more students sometime.
Any other spaces?
No, but one of the alternatives that came up on the elementary side, these poor guys, they've gotten like 12,000 emails from me and articles, and they humored me on this stuff, but, you know, when we talk about the FOAG in the Center for Career Discovery at the high school, there's no reason that we couldn't create of that same model in the elementary and middle school and use some existing buildings in our community that have been abandoned or being repurposed. So when we took a look at, there's the Torrent building, and then we did the tour, was the other Torrent building, and then there was the other,
West Mall.
well, there was that one down south. What was the down south one?
The one down south, we looked at the
Kimber building.
Timber building. So we were at the time exploring spaces in our community that could work as a new district office. But I walked into that Torrent building and I went, okay, here's this building that used to be occupied for these different professional purposes, and now these professionals have gone online. We could not build that space for what we could buy that space for and repurpose it. So if we're thinking of these creative engineering spaces, these, like robotics labs, things that places where a group of middle school kids or even elementary kids could occupy at different times, and it allows for flexible scheduling, I think there's huge potential, and that becomes part of the vision, what type of overall educational programming plan we want for our kids. Then I think exploring those alternative sites and those alternative programs could be just as valuable as the current BOAG building is for our high school. And well, so that falls under just like the extended classroom experiences, where that becomes the school. So that falls under our regular transportation, which is a permissive levy. It's no different than getting them to Peterson as it would be getting them to that.
price tag on that, looking at what it costs per model, was 32 million or something like that on hedges, and we really blocked at 5 million at the Torrent. It's like, oh, it's way too much, Now you start putting it into perspective, it's like, ooh, what's that, 40,000 square foot for 5 million? That's,
5 million.
yeah, that's a pretty good deal.
And I think that there is some struggle in the community with those former spaces that were used by different professional groups to do. I mean, the Gateway building doesn't appeal to me. I mean, there's like windows that were 15 feet off the ground, and I don't know if that's the best space for education, but I think there are more and more of those spaces, and keeping a creative mind, I think we could, if our vision is to clearly articulate what it is we expect kids to know and be able to do, and we're flexible with where kids learn, we're flexible with the time of when kids learn, we want kids to take more ownership and have more real-life application, those become the benchmarks. And I think the first thing to go in my mind is replicating the traditional school. I would not advocate for, let's just do this, let's build. I think it would be what aligns to that vision, and then what types of spaces do we need to accommodate. I think of the CenturyLink building that's out by KMS, right behind Copper Mountain. I just spied places like that, and I go, this is within walking distance of KMS. It's this big warehouse. I think they use a couple offices. It's not for sale, by the way. But spaces like that could be repurposed in our community, and then proximity issue would be solve some busing issues. But I think we could identify, first reason they're here tonight is to clarify and articulate, gather information about where are we going, what's the bigger vision, and we can start pursuing some of these alternative ideas and start scratching them off the list. They're at a point where they just need some direction. What do we want them to do with the remainder of their time?
Or are there any major, like, you guys go down the wrong rabbit hole, like, we're not in support of something? We're not touching that schedule point, great. Or, we're not looking at year-round schedule, great. Take that variable off. Sometimes the best thing we can do is take variables off the table, because it just helps us a little bit. And there's a lot of variables up here in that see this, I mean, there's a lot of variables of what you could do across all of this work, and so just honing in there is something to think about. One thing we didn't touch on that you've already heard it mentioned many times here is like the alignment of K4 or 5-8, and there's a lot of conversation about where the fifth grade lives. This is a conversation we have in a lot of districts. The point of why we did that was really to alleviate, to your point, the elementary students' capacity. That was an easy
easier and faster way from an operational standpoint too, to move students so that you could take a lot of fifth graders and put them into the capacity you already have. And there was a lot of conversation around how big is a middle school? What is the right size middle school? You're one of the largest in the state. I think you and Belgrade are probably vying for that right now. They are looking to try and split right now. They're too big. They're at about 1,100 students or something. 1,200, I can't remember what the numbers are. But they're looking to split and move their fifth graders in another direction. But that's what the game becomes. Where are you putting students and where are you putting bonds? If we're gonna do that, why don't we put them in the right learning environment, or what we think is the right learning environment?
So the one thing that I have been thinking as I've been saying this is right along the lines of that, and it's something that I had mentioned to Micah, and we talked about a little bit, is in my ideal world, I like the idea of putting an early childhood area into something like the sixth grade wing of the middle school. I really feel like kindergartners and first graders, from everything that I know, and Jennifer knows more about this than I do, but they are still early childhood, and I think that putting them in a different specialized learning environment is where we could get the most out of them. There's so much research about if you get kids that strong early childhood foundation, it changes the whole game for the rest of the time they're in school. And I'm not like, no, I wouldn't approve this, but I would like to see an option for that. My grand idea.
Is it a 5-6 center and a 7-8 center? Would that be something?
No, so
And K2, 3, 6.
like
Well,
K,
it's really K-3.
yeah, but K2, because otherwise you end up with something, but K3. If you get the littlest kids into a early childhood environment, and what Mike and I had talked about was that sixth grade wing at the middle school could be retrofitted. It has its own access, it has its own green space, and it could be an early childhood area. You would need somewhere to put those middle school students, but if we were splitting, I would really, really like to looking at how we do the earliest childhood education in our district and see if we can specialize it more to their needs. Really, you know, not that 30 kids in a class or 24 kids in a classroom thing, which just isn't really shown to work for that age as much, and be creative there. Instead of, that would be my vote over the K4, yeah, you know, and like kind of split it up like that to really focus however, you know, many grades we can fit. And I don't know how the numbers would work out, but I think even if you did K first, and the reason I say that is because most of those kids are still being taken to school. They aren't taking the bus yet. And so it's not a huge difference for parents to drive their kids to either the early childhood center south or north than it is to take them to their community school.
What we often hear in the community, because we often hear this great alignment of a K3, a 3-5, or a K2, 3-5.
Mm-hmm.
Feedback we hear from the community, and I'm not saying you're right or wrong, but what they hear is parents look at it from afar.
Mm-hmm.
And they say, I've got a kindergartner and I've got a fourth grader, now I've got 2 drop-offs, I've got 2 pickups. Fortunately, they're not looking at it from an educational standpoint, they're looking at it from the regional.
Right.
How they're picking people up.
Right, well, and that's why, you know, by fourth grade, I think kids can start taking a bus if parents can't swing.
We're gonna have to do that eventually.
Yeah, yes, they do.
That's just the feedback we get. Whenever I present that, I'm like, we start taking bullets at that point.
Right, well, and I think, I mean, I do hear that, I do hear that, but, you know, I think the majority of the working parents here are already dealing with, they have multiple kids with preschool and elementary school.
And to be fair, you know, I'm totally with, you know, yes, I have many friends with 3 different kids in 3 different schools. Matt, aren't you 3 kids in 3 schools yet? And it's stressful, but it's not, I don't think exactly where the break falls affects it greatly. But how I would look at this is what we've done that works. And to me, it was very innovative. When we set up the middle school, we set up a very specific plan. We knew it was huge. We knew this was a transitional time period, the kids, and when we built it with, you know, three thoughts in mind, you know, potting and homeroom and teams. And now we're talking about getting rid of those, which I, you know, as everyone knows, has a problem with. But, so to me, it's not so much where the splits are, but that we, I guess, go along the ways you're talking about of making sure that our facilities and our teachers and our dreams for the school are integrated well. And I feel this district does have a history of looking at that, but perhaps not keeping it long-term.
And I don't think we're suggesting at any point changing what you're doing in the middle school. Honestly, I think that was probably one of the positive things we heard from the middle school. They actually really liked the way they're set up. They really liked how that was functioning. And I don't think we're suggesting that at all. Fifth grade integration, you could leave it K-5, it doesn't really matter. I think we were just saying from pure capacity standpoint, that could be an option.
Oh, no, I was saying when we're looking at how to do K4, I'm like, do it like we do the middle school.
Oh,
Put
yeah,
in the
okay.
systems of what we need and what we need facility-wise to support what we need. But actually, Jen keeps saying the elementary is in trouble. Maybe it's been a while since we've been in these meetings, but I remember looking at your slides and thinking the high school was under much bigger pressure than.
Yeah, I think high school said we're not gonna exceed for a while.
From a pure capacity standpoint, your elementary schools are you're probably gonna face that before you're gonna face your high school, though you are facing it specifically in some of your general ed, science spaces, in those spaces. But you have capacity there. So your elementary is you're gonna reach first.
But I think you were looking at the 5 years and saying that the growth of the, outlying districts was 3 times the growth of Kalispell. And so that's why our high schools are gonna be in problems.
You have a lot more capacity and you have a
Oh,
lot
you
more
can-
options, I think, to other ideas of having done those necessarily these facilities.
The larger, to Matt's credit and actually what you were just speaking to is I think at this point, the committee has uncovered a lot of different puzzle pieces. The question is not how they go together, the question is, what is the vision of what you guys want to do? And that's, kind of the larger question. I think these are some of the distilled priorities that seem to continue to rise to the top. I do not think that they necessarily have to correct them, or they already are, but, these are the themes that I think from the outside, as we have looked at it, they continue to come up. But I think as you're starting to look at these, I think as a team and as a committee, I think there's confidence in this idea that, like, we can figure this out. We can absolutely figure it out, but it is more about the larger question of what is it that you want to figure out and create? What is the larger message that you can want to rally the community behind?
We do the realignment without building a second middle school?
No. I need to look at that, that's a good question. I think what you're doing is you're just putting the stress now on your middle school, you know what I mean? So it's like you're moving it to stretch your middle school, I don't think you could do that without middle school.
Okay,
I think would panic
I was
if you
looking
had
at
all
those and-
fifth grade.
Okay, yeah, so
Let's
those
look into
two go
that.
hand in hand, the first
Yeah.
two. I mean, if we moved K4, we'd have to build a new.
If we're building a new middle school, it gives us a lot of flexibility to decide what we want it to look like.
But in this case, we're taking Elrod down, and
Right.
consolidating one elementary school, essentially, and so that's what, that. Because Elrod probably has, from a deficiency standpoint, that was the other side of this, is like, what school's in the worst shape, or has the most operational cost back to that at the same time? How are we knocking down the stones? That Elrod probably made the most sense.
If we do the alignment and build a new middle school, do we have to do the renovations to the other 3 elementary schools to the 2 to 90 members?
Meet the capacity needs, yes. Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there's any scenario where there's a way to not do work at the elementary. Also still need.
That's kind of what I was getting.
It doesn't have to
Like on
look
the
like
high
what we've
school,
shown today, it could look like something different, but yeah, even if you take fifth grade out, still gonna be kind of.
Like on the high school end, that we can create a center for career discovery that isn't necessarily even a building that we build, but a partnership that we make both virtually with our partners, right? So it seems like the high school, you can do things that aren't going to require passage of bonds, but I guess I'm not seeing necessarily a path forward on the elementary front. But did I not gonna see.
You're not seeing a path forward when you start.
Well, without doing a massive
Oh, yeah,
infrastructure
yeah,
bill.
I just showed them those.
It's tough,
Get
God.
yeah.
I mean, as Matt was saying, I mean, at his point, I think he's trying to think creatively, right?
Right.
From an operations standpoint. Outside of relying on your community or relying on something, purely facility standpoint related to capacity, you're gonna need room spaces, whether that's used in some case, or if you have that alternative.
Or we do, 4 days in classroom, 1 day outside.
I mean, outside,
But then we would need a CCD for something to accommodate, right?
So a lot of those solutions get us, partway down the road. And so when we did that timeline and like that growth projection, we looked at that 10-year, but we looked at what the numbers were gonna be in 5 years. So
Right.
some of those solutions get us down the road. And we partnered those with the last bullet on the elementary side was, like piloting some of these programs. Mary, you had different language.
implement pilot programs.
Yeah, implementing some of these pilot ideas in different scales. So, you know, taking that wing of Rankin that was actually designed for it, if we just invested in some training with our staff and then use that space and pilot, there's zero construction cost associated with just running a pilot with that space. Once we get past that threshold though, where, and I'm not gonna say limit to creativity, but there's probably a cap on unless you have to find new space somewhere, right? We did talk about finding the areas in our district that were growing the fastest now, that we're gonna create the most urgent problem, and then identifying the spaces that have the most long-term projection based on their growth demographic. And, so in the immediate future, it's like Peterson, Elrod, Russell, because of the apartment complexes coming online. But the long term, the area was actually the Edgerton School District out north of town. Because of that space, now that space is being developed, it's already our biggest school, and it also has the biggest, potential for the most long-term growth. I think it was like 15%. Yeah. So that would probably be the site of a second school, elementary school, if you took one of the city schools offline. Then the discussion became which schools, would be the best to, like do a new school or a remodel to. And Hedges actually popped up because they have a bigger footprint of land capacity, and Brad mentioned earlier that you strain the community when you're talking about drop-off and pickup routes and parking and those types of things. And you could build a new school on that property while you currently have the kids in the current school. And so you wouldn't be displacing as many students. So we did fish out those details, but that was more of, I'd say, like, second level, if we're seeing these growth trends, solutions.
Hey, this is just, speculation, but I think that if we are tearing down any building, the community is going to, I think they're going to see that as us making irresponsible decisions, and I think people are emotionally attached to the schools we have. Not to say we absolutely shouldn't, but I think that if any part of our plan involves tearing down schools, people are going to be in an uproar.
Yeah, just to clarify, we didn't talk about tearing down, we talked about repurposing. And one of the things we talked about specifically with Elrod was that could be the central office. Right, we were looking for space for the central office, and we're currently in 2 spots. That could be the space where we were under one roof. And then that decreases the, kind of the urgency on some of the, other repair, upgrade issues. And then with Hedges, it'd be the same thing, you just repurpose it. I think tearing down a historical building in Kalispell, might be problematic when you're trying to pass bonds. But I
But they
think,
might show up to the meeting
yeah.
So we just say we're going to do it.
Oh,
I'm not fully on board with your
We
planting
can
room
start the rumors
strategy.
and let them feel like they convinced us to change our mind. I had,
That might be a housing, help out housing.
oh, there we go. So now, when we were talking about possibly building this extra middle school, what were we saying with these, renovations? We would need to do the renovations to the elementaries? eliminating Elrod.
Yeah,
Have you guys looked into, have we talked at all about, like, a kindergarten center, in Spokane, that's a big thing. They've got, like, a full building is just the kindergarten center, and kinders get bused there. It's a half day. You can either go the morning session, you go the afternoon session, or working parents can choose and pay for the child to go all day. But it's literally kind of what you're talking about, where it's just focused on the youngers, where if you had a center that was early K, you know, kindergarten, and then possibly first grade, I don't know.
Was one of the thoughts of Elrod.
Okay.
It could become the district office, you could repurpose and consider those. Talking about just challenges sometimes of school programs and not having admin there. So you don't have a principal in a building, having the district office, you have that asset. Those programs to exist. Simply eliminating it or remodeling it too heavily. If it were to become the district.
I'm just
So I
wondering if you
think your comment though about early care is exactly kind of the feedback we're looking for. What do you as a board, what is your vision for what you want to be? Because we'll solve the environment, we'll solve the space, we'll solve where you need to do it. We just need to know, what is the alignment? Where do you want the kids? What alignment do you want? If you want a early childhood center, if you want a K-3 center, if you want a minimum, we can solve that. At some point, you're gonna have to like kind of hone in on what that means and what that is. And I think that's where we in the community are looking for that, like, what we feel is the right solution.
Clear when we were looking at that, that's purely a numbers game. So it's like, you could do that and say, and had to develop kindergarten, it was really a way for us to say, here's how you need the capacity, what types of bodies are in those spaces.
Yeah,
I think we all have different ideas
Yeah,
where we're
well,
going with this.
but with yours, again, like, just because, so like, one kindergarten is nice, but I thought that's why, if there was one already north at the middle school, because if we build a whole new middle school, that's why you have to move things around. We don't need a whole new middle school. That's like more capacity than we need, so something would have to change in middle school. And then if at the south side, where the middle school could go, that got built with like a alternative, then people could be more neighborhoodish, either north or that like Flathead Glacier thing.
My comment on this is, we're kind of talking convenience, dividing up these age groups. What is the best thing for student achievement? What is the best thing for our students?
Right.
Is it to isolate, kindergarten students on their own, or is it to integrate them? I don't know. I would like to see the research. What's the best configuration? I know, because I know there's information out there. Rather than us just guessing and saying, well, it would be convenient, we have this building, we could use it for this group. But, if our goal is student achievement, we have to look at that. Is that the best configuration for our kids?
What we've
I don't
found
know.
in this conversation related to fifth graders, because we had that fifth graders, they're like, where do they belong, middle school?
Yeah.
You have data that supports both. Really the environment you put around your students, from a curriculum standpoint, you could find a whole bunch of data that shows it could be fine in the middle school, and high achievement, you could find data that supports that it's really good in the elementary. It really comes down to where you as a district, the curriculum, the environment you put around them from a learning, not from a space standpoint, from a learning environment, what do you create around them from a cultural standpoint, all those other things is where they see the success.
I just really quick want to say, to speak to that, there's a lot of data out there about early childhood. And to Ursula's point, if we're talking about building a whole new middle school, let's say we built like an early childhood center instead, it wouldn't cost as much because they don't need the same amounts of things, right? They don't need as much technology, they don't need a football field, and they don't need this and that and the other thing. But you could really get a lot of those pre
P3 teachers, the pre-K through third grade teachers, and they can all be kind of housed there. And so you're not isolating just kindergartners, you have like a whole group of early childhood that are learning at a pace
Yeah,
that's
well,
right
that's
for
what I'm
them.
saying, is
Yeah.
we need to look at what is best for the kids, you know, not just what's best
Right.
for the
But
configuration.
speaking money-wise, if we have to build
Yeah.
something, like, it does seem that a
Yeah.
early childhood center would be more
Is-
cost efficient.
Is that where our school population is growing, is in early childhood?
The demographic does go down to two, it basically says at a grade level and as well as a, school, that's how it's going to go.
Enough capacity, if we're to add a second building, whether it be early childhood or middle school or something, if we're to do that, but keep Elrod online, that was the one that we were gonna take offline. We have the capacity then, and we'd have to do a realignment of like K through 2 or whatever at this center, and then 3 through 6 at the various elementary schools, and just 7 and 8 at the middle schools, we do it that way, or whatever. I mean, do we have enough, does that fix the numbers game that we have? There's a numbers game we have to play here.
Yeah, we'd have to look into that, to be honest with you, I think. So if I'm saying all K-3, for an example, would go to it just like a middle school, you have everyone from your district going to that facility, we'd have to plan for that size facility. Is that 800 students, is that, and we don't know what that is, and we have to kind of figure that
Well, you can almost back your way into it and
Yep.
say, all right, if we were to bring 6th grade down to elementary schools and disperse them around, what grades could go to the center, or.
That's the game we get into at play. But then you start looking at it from a curriculum standpoint, you know, in your elementary schools, do you have the band room, the music rooms? Or fifth grade potentially. Oftentimes in fifth grade, those things change, right? Where you have different curriculum for orchestras, bands, different things that you may not have in your elementary schools. Are you starting to put a square peg in a round hole? We did talk about those facilities and, housing and warning. We talked about FECC, that early childhood center building was empty, and we said that, you know, that, those spaces that you repurpose. And we talked about different spaces that could work for that EK, or actually kindergarten, through second kindergarten, the discussion circles back to that operational cost. You're adding a whole other building, and the operational cost, we can't even afford to run buildings that we currently have. So that becomes really a non-starter discussion unless there's a trade-off where you take a building offline.
Yeah.
That just that, I think that we've gotten in trouble probably as a district by making decisions where we keep, we've spread out, and we have these operational costs, and we've committed to these operational costs at all of these independent sites that don't sustain themselves, and then we up with the cost of doing business, cost of repairs, all of those sites. That's part of the predicament we're currently in.
Discussion in any of our outlying districts about expanding the schools, maybe even a high school. I mean, the amount of kids out in West Valley, I mean, you look at the size of.
That was
Thinking
my
out loud,
belief, and I was
is
like,
there-
we tell
and I'm
Lakeside,
not
let's like
saying-
build
I'm
our
not saying
own.
we say, but are we hearing any
They won't.
discussions of that happening that would affect how we need to be looking at this plan?
No, not formal discussions. I would say that probably the closest, district discussion would be a potential discussion with West Valley. I mean, they're the district that's growing. They've gone through several different remodels. They would probably be the district that would have the potential to add schools. But they also don't have the tax base to be able to support a high school. And they've, recently failed bonds, and part of the challenge they have is that their tax base is so small for their student population that their ask for their community is really high in comparison. Our ask is relatively small because we have a large tax base with a smaller student comparison. So I think they're asking like hundreds of dollars, and we're asking tens of dollars. I think they exaggerating a little bit on the numbers, but probably not too far off.
Yeah.
But those relationships require, an agreement between both boards to consolidate districts. And I think that, you know, that's a bureaucratic, it takes
let Smith Valley have a station, and you'd have to have at least 3 to just offer what you could offer. You're not even just talking double consolidation.
I was just curious if anything like that was happening that would affect how we consider this long-term plan.
No.
It sounds like the answer is no.
The other best example is Belgrade, because they had a commercial base that allowed them to have a high school district and go the high school route. If you don't have a commercial base, you're not gonna be successful having another high school. That's gonna be West Valley, because commercial is 40% higher than residential. And if you're almost 99% residential, the impact on the taxpayer is tremendous. So it's not likely to happen, even though there may be a need there. The other aspect to remember when we're talking about a new elementary school or consolidating the smaller, eliminating Elrod, for example, and repurposing it. I don't remember exactly which year Rankin started up. I don't remember if it was 20 or 21. But the big concern in starting Rankin up was if we would have enough general fund money to operate it, to open it up. We got the bond money to build it, but it was very difficult. We had to do a lot of things in order to have the funds to operate it. And fortunately, there were some student enrollment increases that helped with that, but that was the biggest concern. So to me, going with repurposing Elrod would make more sense, and going with K-4, even though a pre-K might make sense somewhere, I'm not sure that we're ready for that yet. And then going with another middle school would just be good. I was looking at where I went to school, and they have 19 elementary schools. They have 5 middle schools and 5 high schools. Serves 18,000 students. So there's an interesting ratio there, and as far as sizing it. And there's a number of older, smaller schools there that might have elementary schools that might have 200 or 300 students in it at the maximum. But it is, but it was also a growing community that is still growing there. But to me, the direction that they've come, I think, makes a lot of sense as far as the elementary recommendations for that right there.
To speak to Sue's point, if we were in a complete vacuum, I think, and starting from scratch, I would go with a compound view, you know. Every elementary school has 3 buildings, a K through 1, a 2 through 4, and a 5 through 7. And so that therefore they can, you know, the transitions are small, they're in the same building, that they can get used to it, you're using the same parking, you know, that would, to me, be the obvious ideal for both giving everyone their due and making the transitions easy for families as well, as we talked about the 6 different school drop-off issue. I don't think we have that possibility in this area. So I think with what we have, what we really need to keep in the forefront of our minds is that we now have 3 Kalispells. We have this walkable downtown district, and I do think on the elementary level, the people are very attached to we live in this neighborhood, our kids walk to this neighborhood, our kids hang with the other kids. I mean, you probably all remember the fall-for-all that happened when we talked about moving our boundaries, and people were like, yes, that's only 6 blocks away, but it's 6 blocks across Highway 93, you can't ask my child to walk, you know. That I think we're very committed to our neighborhoods, which has always been the problem with Elrod, you know, being where it's situated, right between 2 other schools. And so I think there's the downtown neighborhood walkable community, so this idea of another unwalkable middle school, you know, and I think now we have a North Kalispell and a South Kalispell, and I think almost, if we're looking at the compound views of them, of having, you know, groups that stay together, I mean, you can argue about whether it's better for students to go out and to meet in different groups at different ages, or whether it's better to stay together, or, you know, but I think the solutions for the the small downtown Kalispell are not the same solution as the area up by Glacier or KMS, and are not the same solution as the area down by, Rankin. I think that those are three very separate mindsets, if you will. And they require, maybe you can have the same sort of mindset for Rankin and for the Glacier area, if you'll, take those as markers. But I do think we shouldn't be thinking of the downtown area in the same mindset as the other two.
I think it's important to think about those neighborhood schools, like you say, because walkability of the core Kalispell schools is very different than the walkability of the schools, in North and South Kalispell. I'd be curious what stats would say as to, of the students at, Hedges, what percent walk to school versus drive as opposed to Edgerton, as opposed to Lincoln, and that can kind of tell you a little bit more about.
It was 70-30, 15 years, or 12 years ago. It's now down to about 40%. It was 70% biking, walking, happy to go to the year. But it is now considerably reduced in that 10-year span. It's now down to about 40% walking, biking. And Hedges, is one I know.
Well, and I don't think that's a make it or break it, because it depends on where you live. I mean, where we live, nobody is walking to school.
Right.
Nobody is.
No, that's what we're saying,
Yeah.
is that there's a walking concept of schools, which is very different than the driving concept of the different areas.
People that live downtown are attached to it.
Right, but I don't think we should treat anybody differently if we're looking at what's best for their school, our district, and the kids' education. If we have to make changes, we can't treat anybody differently. We need to do what's best for the kids and their education. We can't have class
It's not about
sizes
treating people
35
differently, it's about
and-
understanding what the different communities we're serving are.
So just because they walk to school, we shouldn't bother them and change things up? That would be better for everybody? Is that what you're trying to say? Because
No,
it's
that's not
different,
at all what
because
I'm-
they're a downtown school?
No, I'm saying that they have different solutions and different needs. That the idea of building a driving, K-only situation is not serving the needs of all our populace. I'm saying that we have to think about, just like you said, Saturday isn't a thing that you think you could do because you don't think that's within the identity. I'm saying that we have two different types of identity, and we may need different types of solutions and concepts for how we're working with them.
But if making a K-only building was what was best for the entire district, don't you think that's a better solution, even though it doesn't fit the downtown people? I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
I think, honestly, if you're gonna ask why their kids, probably makes more sense to do it on the K end, right? Because you're used to driving your kids to daycare anyway, right? Usually. So, I mean, that's where, everybody would be driving. And, the walking to school, there's kids up at Edgerton that walk to school. There's kids, I think we don't wanna, have our schools just be a location where kids go to learn. I think that there is a concept of this neighborhood school that we wanna hang on to and try and serve the neighborhoods around those schools. But, we are gonna have to look at, I think we have to look at some sort of different alignment and frankly, some sort of different infrastructure for elementary and middle school. I just don't think there's any way around it, at least as I'm seeing this. And so, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, guys, but what you guys need from us tonight is direction as to what to go back with and try and focus the rest of your
And
effort.
honestly, we came into tonight saying, we're gonna overwhelm them. We said it before we walked in there, we're gonna overwhelm them, we're gonna give you a lot of information. We don't necessarily need to have some definitive answers tonight. We need you guys to be having this conversation. At some point, you're gonna be posed with, what we wanna do, just to kind of maybe help wrap, maybe if you wanna wrap, but, we're building a long-range facility plan that we're gonna give to you. It is a document that we hope you use and want to use, and that as you move forward in these conversations, that you can look at it and say, One of the recommendations that maybe we as a committee make, and maybe you can discuss those, there might be tiered levels of recommendations we make that you can discuss and have conversation on. We want to make sure that we're not putting forward any recommendations that is really out of alignment with where you want to go from a district. In that facility report, you're going to have everything from a look at every school, like Lance would say, just a quick synopsis of what is the talk about Peterson, IF needs, opportunities for growth, all of these things that are well organized for you to kind of always reference, and that if you hire an architect besides ourselves or anybody else that takes it, they have the information there of like already have all that information that they. I don't think you guys need to make a decision tonight. I don't think that's what we're asking. But if there's something you want us to continue to explore or look at or spend some additional time over the next few months, if looking at an early education center, if it's looking at something, that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that we make good use of that so that when we deliver that report, then you have that information in your hand. So to take the pressure off having to make a decision.
It's like we've lobbed way more things at you.
That's fine.
Than the
Correct.
great things that you've lobbed.
That's how we got to this.
And you guys have probably talked about a lot of this stuff, so I'm sorry if it's like old news for you guys, but, I mean, what I'm hearing from the board here is interest in, you know, maybe one option model would be like an early K-1 type center instead of a second middle school, and the alignment of the grades on the elementary perhaps. The other option is second middle school, you're talking about realign the grades up perhaps, like.
We can look at all that and just say, here's option 1, option 2, option 3, and then look at that, and you guys can have that.
I'm gonna follow up and just really focus on what those recommendations are there, for the primary reason that transformational learning is gonna impact high school more than the elementary schools. And the biggest stumbling block at the elementary level, I think, is the large KMS. I think that really needs to be split up. And therefore, and go to the 5-8 model, because I think the 5-8 model is very successful in many districts. And then you go the K4 and the other ones and consolidate some of those, because the operational costs that we're gonna have to incur or be subject to going forward is gonna have more impact on the elementary level than the high school, and the high school is gonna probably be freed up with transformational learning going forward, because we don't know what that cost structure is gonna look like. We don't really know what it's gonna look like, but it might have more impact on the high school cost per student. So to me, if I'm gonna look at direction, I'm gonna say up there is really good. The primary focus is at elementary with, restructuring everything and some new construction and repurposing, remodeling. And then the second focus is the high school level to really understand transformational learning and how that might not even change the need to, add or build, because we don't know what that's gonna look like down the road. It doesn't mean that we won't have to do that. We may have to add on to Glacier High School. I don't know that we'll have to do anything with Flathead High School, but we may have to do that because there are gonna be more high school students coming into school in the high school district than there will elementary into the elementary. So to me, that's got a great direction right there, and that the committee did a thorough job covering everything, whether we liked everything or not, and that brought a lot of great ideas into it. And I think that needs to be somehow shared with everybody to let everybody know that there was no stones not turned over, whether you like it or not, and that there may be a need in some aspects to incorporate many of those other things.
Well, and I agree, go ahead, Lance, we haven't heard from you all night.
Yep.
I just want to thank Amy for all their hard work on this. I know there's lots of hours here and a lot of brain power. Bring it in very digestible format. I'd just say, you know, this is a pretty similar conversation we had a decade ago before we built Brandon.
Yeah, I agree.
The big stumbling block back then was operational cost. We had talked about building a middle school, doing 5-8. There was some pushback because the principals, the teachers didn't want to lose their 5th graders. You know, my thought is you can really make a 5, 6, 7, but, the reason we didn't move forward with the 5A, we were hoping Summers, Lakeside would join us. There was some movement that they would, there was some concern, it didn't work out. That would have brought in more operational costs, more A and B, we would have been able to, fund that pretty well. There's also some interest in that K-1, but then the other part was that we do want, at that time, we continue to want to have those strong neighborhood schools. If teachers principals want to have those kids, K through 4, K through 5. And I think there is probably still that strong feeling along the neighborhood schools. That doesn't mean that when we build capacity at 5 through 8, we can't figure out a way to give more attention to those K-1 kids, even though it's not centralized. In general, people don't like central. I appreciate the thoughts that have come kind of filtered to the top. But obviously, lots to explore and flesh out. Great start.
I just had one thing, if we do a 5-8, fifth grade doesn't change classrooms, so it would need like an entire pod that doesn't have like a bell ringing schedule and stuff like that, that's my only thing. Okay, they're all shaking their heads.
I think as far as the high school, so I agree with what Jack said. My only additional caveat would be whether or not we want to give them some direction to look at instead of middle school. And so saying maybe the community doesn't want it, but centralized. Would be like two options that would accomplish. I don't know the data. I defer to all the experts on that. But as far as the high school, it strikes me as things that you guys were showing us with the schedule changes, the things you were showing us with repurposing rooms and workspace to allow more students to be within rooms because it was less of a traditional classroom setting, and then the ability to do a Center for Career Discovery that maybe is part virtual, part FCC, part whatever. I mean, I feel like we can, with all the options you showed us, we can meet the needs even 10 years out for our high school. It feels like it, and you guys would correct us.
Feels like if you ask your high school principals, I think a few of them would say, we need a few things in our high school that like space, but it's not over.
I do think you're right in terms of, like, I think that's why what came up for the high school is addressing immediate needs. So what are those things where it's like, really to meet what we need to get at, this would be ideal. But I think there's some temporary solutions, like you're describing, that are helpful. I think the Center for Career Discovery is part of that larger vision piece, is like when this becomes a little bit more difficult to confront, like can we acknowledge it now, plan for it, so that when we do want to implement it, it is.
Maybe if we have good success partnering with FCCC and get a program going up there, then 5 years down the road, when we're growing, then it makes sense to go, okay, it's time to branch out and be a thing.
I mean, we're studying right now with Billings School District, and their career center. Career center, they're expanding, they're looking to expand it.
I'm sure nobody actually wants this, but if you think back to those years Lance was talking about, 15 years ago, when we did a 1 through 5th grade, Linderman was 6th, 7th, and, we chose to do K and pre-K. We're still not legally, are we legally required to do them now, or are we still not?
Not EK.
So, one way to make space is to not, in this place where we're not passing levies, and as I said, I don't think anyone on the board wants to do this, but if we get down to have to think about hard tax, one of the things we can do is not do the things we're not.
It's only 4 classrooms though per.
I know, I'm just,
It's very small.
but when we built Rankin, we got 7 classrooms, so, anyway, I just think we need to think about what's legally possible and have it in our minds, because we may have to make some choices we don't like, and I don't.
Well, I do agree with this. I like the options you guys have thrown out, and my only hangup is funding it. That, we can't get a levy to pass I have no idea what this ticket number would be going out for a bond. That's my only concern. But I would love to see something like this with 3 options. Like, this is option A. Here's the price tag attached. Here's option B with throwing out something big like a 4-day school week. You know, 3 options where we throw it out to the community of, this is what we're looking at doing. Give us your feedback, let us know, so we know which direction to go. If everybody's on board with this, Career Discovery Center, they might surprise us. I know everybody is on board with it, but I don't think they have a clue what the bond is gonna be for the ask.
And it's important that we break it down, you know, when you start to talk about that information, what does it mean? Sometimes it starts internally we always look at it, and I think the reason we had Davidson at that time was, what does a $36 million bond cost to Kalispell homeowner who owns a, what would that monthly payment be? That's changing actually rapidly because of going on the taxes that are above me, but it's interesting to see, like, in Belgrade, what was about a $12 cost for a $500,000 home. How those costs have changed.
We also tried to run a levy that was
Oh,
cost
yeah,
neutral at one point that
yeah,
they
well,
turned down.
and honestly, what we see, and I know bonds and everything are crazy, people understand buildings.
Yeah.
They don't understand.
I get it.
This is the thing that we see over and over and over again. They just think, well, that's just a pot of money. You guys just need to figure out and work harder. Well, that's a big shiny object. Oh, I understand that. I have to pay. That's what's really difficult. The difference between bonds and levies is very hard for people to understand. We sit in front of boards all the time, so we hear this conversation quite often, and I'm not saying you shouldn't, if you can't pass a levy, it's really serious about the bond, because you gotta, both things have to work together. As much as we think we can educate our communities on the difference and the needs, we used to fall on deaf ears.
Jack, somebody here might know, is the last time we passed the high school levy when we built Glacier, and the superintendent said we can't open the school unless we pass the levy?
But we have all of the bonds we've ever tried.
A bond
We
and a
passed
levy.
the bond, to build Glacier, and then we didn't have the money to run it. And who was it Darlene? Yeah,
2007.
in 2007, and Darlene basically told the community, if you don't pass this levy, we're not opening this new school.
But I don't think we've ever not passed a bond. Have we ever had to put up a bond and had it not passed? I don't believe so.
Not a bond, bonds of all passed.
Bonds have all passed. I mean, it may be a different world, but
Yeah.
we've never tried for a bond that we haven't passed.
Just to what Heather's saying, like, maybe 3 different options, but maybe like to what Matt was saying, like, what about an option where we use some buildings that are already in the community without building something? Like, what if we did buy the Torrance building,
And what could you do?
and what could we do with it?
What
Like,
grade?
how much could we, how
Or
much
how many
impact?
students could you put in there? How could that
Right.
offset the capacity?
And would that be high school students, or would that be middle school students, or would that be early?
Okay, so that was something with, I mean, I think we were all over the board. We threw a lot at you guys. That's something.
No, this is great.
Okay.
Honestly, it's exactly what we look for, because the intention is, as a long-range planning process, it's not that you decide everything today and everything goes perfectly to plan for the next 15 years. But to put things on the table that reasonably fit within, and I think for us to take this back and say, here's what this option looks like holistically and what that could be pursued, bring that back to you is helpful.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for all that work.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we covered it all. Back to the agenda.
Thank you, guys.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
yes, really, thank you, guys. Okay, all we have is take a look at the upcoming meetings. And if anybody's
Motion to adjourn.
to make a motion. Hold up. Oh. I have been told multiple times that they can't hear everybody, so they can't remember. So Krista made the motion and Jen seconded. Okay? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you. And I was gonna say it.